Morning. So these are just a set of slides. What I want to achieve three things. One is to justify what happened next on the time talking about systematic review. So that is to say, I need to introduce the concept of evidence-based practice, evidence-based healthcare. We all know about it, but just to go over it because that's the reason we take all the trouble to sail into critical appraisal, so we're sure about the validity and the relevance of materials we read for decision making at all levels of healthcare. Then I will quickly try to introduce systematic reviewing. And the last part of it will be to just introduce the tools you use later in the day for the critical appraisal workshop, group work. And then we'll be done. I'll try, so I will not do all the slides, some of them will go skip. Okay, let's start. All right, go ahead. Okay, I'll show you this one. Good. Okay, this is the pointer. This is the movement forward. It's not moving now. So good. Great. Good one. Thank you. So I'm doing some definitions. They do 80 minutes knowledge translation, and then also to introduce the knowledge to action framework, which I think is one of the most popular knowledge translation models. Then talk about systematic reviews, some of the tools for critical appraisal. Okay, so what is the evidence-based person? You must have read it in many places. But I just wanted to point out the fact that if you deliberate, it has something to do with the consensus, explicit, judicious use of current-based evidence for making decisions about individual patients. That's when it's evidence-based medicine. When it's evidence-based healthcare, it's about policies, it's about legislation, it's about allocation of resources. But the key words here would be is consensus. It means if you're really not doing it, you're not being, you're too responsible if you're not doing it. So this has to do with consensus. And then it's explicit because there are guidelines, there are specific ways to do it. Constitutions, I don't know what that means. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So these 3 seconds here kind of summarize the things that will constitute evidence-based practice. So one of them won't be enough. So the first of all is to access the best evidence on the question you have to ask. It can be a diagnostic question, it can be a treatment question, a prevention question, it can be a prognostic question, all sorts of questions you ask in the context of any of those. There are ways of finding and critically appraising the evidence. So when you appraise, you know whether it is valid and if it is going to be relevant. Then when you've done that, you will, so that will be the starting point. The next point is to consider the patient's context. Okay, the preferences, the patient's context will include, biological things like the patient's age, cultural values, even economic status. Let's say, for instance, we have 2 antibiotics to give for meningitis. One of them costs 10,000 naira a dose. The other one costs about 1,000 a dose. And the man is a great man, the other one is a governor. Okay, their context will make you make these choices, not because you prefer the governor's child, but because the reality is that the governor can buy the one for 10,000. The great man can only buy the one. But they both effective, that's why you first have to appraise the quality of the evidence. Evidence says that they work. Then there's a slight advantage that the 10,000 naira one had. So the patient's context has to come into evidence-based decisions. Then of course the expertise. I knew everything about brain surgery. I'm not a brain surgeon, so I'll be a useless component in the brain surgical context. So you need the expertise to be able to make it complete. So the doctors and nurses and pharmacists and lab scientists remain relevant. Next one. Okay, that's actually good. So I'm going to skip this. I've said that when you apply this concept in the general context, in public health, in legislation, then we call it evidence-based healthcare. Okay, let's move faster. Okay, that's what the doc said. So we still search and appraise the current best evidence. But then the context will begin to differ now. Their regional, national, international populations and their context. Okay, for instance, in our country, we practice what we call seasonal malaria chemo prevention. We do that in about 10 states in the north and none of the states in the south. It's not because we don't like people in the south, but the evidence that inform this choice say that those who live in a place where you have seasonal malaria, it means that at least 70% of the malaria cases occur in a 4 to 5 month period throughout the year. And this states in the north qualify. Every year we roll out billions and billions, and it saves the lives of all of our children. So the place you are located will give them a can either get this thing or not based on the evidence available. Because the expertise also so counts. Let's go. Examples to leave all the definitions. So now, I'll start with best evidence. Times when we thought that the best evidence were only randomized controlled trials. That's not true. It depends on the question. If the question is about treatment or prevention, yes, you're right. Randomized controlled trials will be the gold standard for making such decisions. What about if you didn't find any? Then there will be a pyramid, if you like, of evidence that has at the peak of it the best available evidence, the best evidence. But if today what we have maybe is just case control studies, then you have to summarize case control studies. Then you have to do critical appraisal of case control studies. Then you have to grade the evidence of those case control studies so that when the guideline book is meeting, they will know how much confidence to place in that piece of evidence. Yes, you can't throw it away because that's the only one we have. You also cannot give it to the guideline book without grading the evidence so they know the confidence to put in that evidence. So all these are the skills you acquire to be able to help people who make decisions about health to do this in a good way. So that's why the best evidence has to be done with what is available now and is done in a proper way. Okay. So what I've just said, if you're going to do something about treatment or prevention, then you go standard with the randomized control trials. And systematic reviews of randomized control trials will have put everything together in a way that is scientifically sound. So you would actually be looking for systematic reviews in the first place. If you didn't find them, then you look for primary studies, which should be RCTs. Now, if you couldn't see them, then you go down these levels. And the bottom of it is case series. Recall when we started having Ebola and COVID. All we had them were case studies, case series, and we summarized them and we made decisions based on them. Today we have randomized trials, so we left those behind. So you move up the levels to the best available evidence at the time you want to make a decision. So then again, these things are not useless because they address different types of questions. But even there, you have to do with treatment, and the sort of interest doesn't have anything in the RCT level, then you have to use them. Okay, so I thought that made that point clear enough. Okay, why do we do the lesson? Because everybody goes down this knowledge slope. Everybody. This is the graph that shows the knowledge medical students had at the time they graduated about how to treat hypertension. So this is what will happen if they don't update. And there are probably around something like 5,000 to 10,000 publications on hypertension therapy every month. Publications. So if you have to read all of them, you go mad. So you need synthesis of evidence either as guidelines or as systematic reviews to make sense of evidence around how to treat hypertension. So if you have the doctors and nurses and pharmacists have to stay up to date and all the people, then you have to help them with making systematic reviews available so that they don't go this. Because when I was younger, I I used to go to schools nearby to teach maths. To help people with maths. They didn't pay me money, I just did it for fun. But I can tell you now, I don't remember even how to do LCM. Because I left mathematics, so mathematics left me. So in the same way, no matter how brilliant you are, you will have first class. If you leave this, it's going to leave you. Okay? And you're going to kill people if you leave. So that's why we need to keep summarizing evidence so that doctors and all those who have things handy to make decisions on. Go to dangerous people, they practice what they had 10 years ago. And many people die from these treatments, but we don't also get unreported. It helps with lifelong learning and it helps to strengthen. So professional development is very important. Like in my practice, I'm sure all of you get, those who are not in training have to get some, CBD every year. I have to get 20. Yes. Sometimes I don't get it, but I get so many because they don't give me certificates. So for many years I didn't get license. I just paid the money. They didn't give me license. So I was practicing, illegally for those days. So what is evidence-based practice? These are the 5 essential steps that you go through every time you make a decision. Sorry, don't mind it. Chapter 8 of the lecture. I think that's from one of the lectures I gave, so not that chapter 8. Okay, so usually you start like we talked to you yesterday, and you ask a very clearly focused question using the FICO framework. Okay, if you're asking, questions about intervention, then it's the FICO framework. But there are other forms of framework that you use, but they still have the P anywhere and they have the O outcome. For instance, if you're going to ask questions about observational studies that are not therapeutic, it is purely observational, then you have to deal with exposure variables. So you ask this question, then you find the evidence. So I'm not going to teach you, because I'm sure you probably know more than I do, about literature searching skills. Those skills are critical, they're very essential, because often you have to see, like yesterday when we were practicing downstairs, we were searching things. I guess most of you would Google. It's better to go to a database in your area of interest and do a proper search. Then you can find things that are close to what would require less time to do critical appraisal on. So you find the evidence. Sometimes you have to find them in databases or at other times in websites where people do regular things around that subject exist. And then what we do today is how to appraise the evidence. Do critical appraisal. And each time when you have appraised evidence, you're looking to find out whether it is valid. When we do systematic reviews, that's the part of it we do. We look for the validity. We leave the decision makers to look out for the relevance. You can make comments about relevance in your discussion, but the real thing about systematic review is to produce the evidence that is valid. So now, going beyond that, because you guys are going to make decisions, you have to go one step further and look for the relevance. So you have the internal validity, which is the rigor and the scientific, processes, every process, they sound enough, and then the relevant is applied to our content. Then, of course, you have to integrate the evidence into your practice when you decide what it is. There are many ways of doing that, but the first case we're used to have the inside practice guidelines, the clinical practice guidelines, or policy briefs, or what they call HTA, Health Technology Assessments. These are assessments that both impute evidence, economic evaluation, cultural context, political decisions, all. So it decides evidence around these domains. Then it presents a big document either for politicians to make decisions about whether to give cholera vaccine to every Nigerian or not. We know that cholera vaccines work for a short time. Should we recommend cholera vaccine for all Nigerians? We need an HTA document, health assessment document, because those not only deliver on the evidence about effectiveness and safety, but also deliver evidence on the cost effectiveness, on the cultural relevance, and economic and political rightness. Just only about the essence. Okay, so those are ways to get evidence products across to people who need them in the format they need them. And then, of course, so the last, number 5 is important. That is about audit. Audit is a requirement for practice in most countries. Now, when they hire you in England as a doctor or nurse, their employment letter says you are going to do X number of audits compulsory every year as part of your personal professional development. Because it's always good to look back and see if we got it right. And that could inform actions that will improve quality. So it's a well-known method in the quality improvement environment. So audit cycle starts with checking what we've done or setting standards. And most times the standards come from guidelines or the standards you say because you've done research and you found studies that say it should be done this way. So you check what you are doing by collecting data around your practice department, the last 20 patients you saw with that condition and how you manage them. And then if you didn't take an action, then it's not an audit. An audit means when you finish, then you have to plan a set of actions to implement change. That's what we call the quality improvement. So the audit cycle is audit is just one way, a very important way of keeping the cycle of evidence-based practice constantly in motion so that you don't stop somewhere and say, I used to live this way, so as it was in the beginning, and now shall live ever without it. But things change. So to avoid that, keep doing audit. Okay, so let's go. This is a terminology, I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but I think we should stop here and look at it. Many of you already know this, but you should know it if you are in healthcare today. It's a term that we use often about knowledge translation. But the Canadians have learned the way we define it is a dynamic iterative process that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and ethically sound application of knowledge to improve. So there are different models of knowledge translation. And you see the first point of it is synthesis. So knowledge keeps growing everywhere, and it will take an effort to, around a given question, to synthesize evidence in a scientific way. And when you've done that, to move it into a knowledge product that is suitable for that decision, which may be just patient decision information or guidelines. Okay, so let's go to see this model, which I think I'm one of those that is selling it in the country because I like it. It's called Knowledge Action Framework. Okay? So it starts with this diamond like here. So the upper side of the code is the knowledge inquiry. This is where you have primary research, of all sorts, existing. But then you have next with knowledge synthesis and then knowledge products. Okay, so the knowledge inquiry does refer to primary research. It can be randomized control trials, it can be core studies, but all those things that happen over time have grown in large numbers over time. For it to be relevant, yes, and safe to use, you need to synthesize evidence. And appraise it both for validity and for relevance. And then put them in a format, a knowledge product, either as a guideline or as policy brief, the form that those who are going to read it will understand it fast. Because some of these things come with very large jargons that make it difficult to understand. So, and if you look at the side of it says tailor the knowledge. So and you're going to have a lecture today on the implementation of research. You're going to come to the word tailoring because each time no jacket, this my jacket because it's my size. Some of the guys in the room, if you give them this jacket, will not fit them. Okay? I'm not able to be as small as I am now. So there's what I say will be too large for somebody. But I've said that there's nobody that is small enough for this to be too large for me. If I gave it to a 3-year-old, it would be too large. So in the knowledge translation, knowledge to action framework, you always have to think, does this set of knowledge fit this context? Because if you try to apply it to everyone, sometimes you waste money, sometimes you move money from one area where it's not needed in that context, other things suffer, people actually die because you not try to apply the knowledge well. And then around it is the action side, which of course, the way you use this knowledge in whatever area you intend to use it. I will not do more about it. So this is called the knowledge action framework. You can always, I'm going to give you this slide so you can find it. There's a whole lot around knowledge translation, and I think you should get it. This is just what I've said. Knowledge inquiry, that's basic research or primary research, sorry. The knowledge synthesis, that's systematic review or mapping guidelines. Then we create knowledge products, which are the guidelines of that, and tools. Okay, this just explaining what I've just said. So algorithms, like all those things they use for IMCI, they're all part of the tools you create. And patient decision, tools. Then it's the action side of it. Identify the problem, you review the knowledge, and then you apply it to the local context. Okay, you identify barriers, and you get the barriers, develop it in the implementation process. And then also you monitor the environment, just like within the clinical context where you do audit, you monitor the environment. And sustaining the use means you have to make sure that sustainability is feasible. Otherwise, like most of the donor-driven interventions in our country, imagine what will happen today if the Americans stop giving us money for HIV treatment. Okay, who will start dying like flies again? Isn't it? God forbid. We have good governments in the US, so I'm not sure they will do that. Only this year, I think President Biden has said he will give, if double or if what all the people in the world will give for global fund, I think he will give double that or something. So that's one of the best countries in the world. You don't believe me, sorry. Okay, in all the concepts I've just tried to explain to you, systematic reviews, keep recurring as what synthesis, evidence synthesis. You want to get a grant now, you heard Oliver say it, you want to get a grant now, could help your chances if you did systematic review around the subject. So that you don't try to reinvent the wheel. Something they did 10 years ago, and you say that's what you want to do today. You will not win the grant. So even grant givers want to see that you've done everything. So this is so important now that it's essential that we learn this skill. So that's what I'm going to do next. Quickly go over how to. So this is just saying that even in guidelines, this is American Stock Medicine. There are two groups that lead guideline development in the world. The WHO is one, the IOM, American Stock Medicine, the other. They produce the best tools for making practice guidelines in the world. So Institute of Medicine has led the way. WHO is just coming on board lately, but just because the global, convening power is strong, so they've got more experts than the Americans. So the Americans are included in WHO. But you see, the first bullets in this guideline making must be based on systematic reviews. If they are not existing, then we have to make new ones. Okay. So that's why what we're doing now is important. So the WHO guidelines, what are basically like the American standards. Okay. These coming from what they call guidelines that we can trust. They have a standard for trustworthy guidelines. So one of them is that those guidelines should be based on systematic review. That's the American guideline. This is the WHO handbook on guidelines. The WHO recommendations have to be based on evidence that is synthesized, blah, blah, blah. The last one says the recommendations in two guidelines should be based on systematic reviews of scientific literature. So all their guidelines, there must be systematic reviews before. As I speak to you, we have a group of Nigerians who live in Nigeria and outside Nigeria who are doing, I think, about 14 systematic reviews to update the WHO guideline on IBC in the context of COVID. Okay, it was published, it was a call, so we applied and we won the bid. Okay, so just like you will be for research, we won the bid, and we don't know how much it is, it's a lot of money. So So, and then they can see that it's so important that people invest in it. It was one of those ones that I wasn't in the guideline group, but I was among those who have praised the guideline. So the bill was business class to Geneva just to go and contribute to the systematic review. You know, so that's how important these things are. So I'm just trying to sensitize to make you want to do it because I think it's very important. Okay. This is just my saying that where is it now? Why is systematic review? Sorry. This one. Yeah. So it says trustworthy guidelines, these are Americans, trustworthy guidelines and systematic reviews will go hand in hand. Okay. So I can make that point more strongly, so it's important that you bear that in mind. Okay. No, the Americans used to have only the corporate handbook on systematic reviews. But in 2011, Americans developed their own handbook. It's wonderful, it's free, online, so I think you should get a copy of it. It's called Finding What Works in Healthcare, Standards for Systematic Reviews. And Americans always exceed them when they do it too well, but they put a lot of money into it. So, WHO has been, Cochrane handbook is the very best. Because Cochrane is, we all volunteers, so people do it from their hearts. The world's collection of the best heads are the ones doing it at no cost. That's why they give the very best. So the best handbook in the world on how to do reviews is the Cochrane handbook. But next to it is this document for the Americans. So find it and then see how it helps you. If you want to know how this one sets standards. But the Cochrane handbook shows you how to. Okay, how to. If you want to do the how to use the handbook. And they all agree because they're all based on principles. You want to know the how to step by step. And the handbook is free. The paper form is you have to buy it in the shop. They have an electronic PDF copies that are free online. Okay. So I'm going to skip this, just the standards again. I don't worry. Okay, I think this slide is in the wrong place. Okay, it's actually speaking to grading evidence. Okay, what I can say here is you notice that we have both randomized control trials and observational studies. So you can grade evidence regardless of whether they are RCTs or not RCTs. For RCTs, we assume that the evidence is good. So you start the certainty of it, the quality, if you like, is assumed to be high. But they have these 5 criteria for downgrading the quality. Okay? So it has limitations in any of these fields. So something can start at high certainty evidence, and before you finish grading, it becomes very low certainty. It means we don't know. It's not likely that can be trusted. But for observational studies, you start assuming that the evidence is low quality because they have a lot of issues with confounding these studies. So they have low certainty evidence. This one starts with high certainty evidence. So it means you can only go up. The lead that is down needs to fear no fall. So this one is already down. Because if they have any of these criteria, there's a very large effects consistently on the studies, then probably works. So you can upgrade it from low to moderate quality. Okay, and all these other things. So if you have a chance to look at grade, the details are, like I said, it's in the wrong place. So I'm going to go split these two. So when this systematic review, so it's just a way of identifying, selecting, assessing, and synthesizing studies, findings from different studies that address the same question. Okay? Okay, so they say that they have good observations. Okay, so let's go through the steps on how to do systematic review. So number one is that you formulate a question. Okay. So these questions are, we had a word to write on it. So I can make this more interactive. But these questions are, we want to assume that we're doing questions on effectiveness. It means whether or not a preventive measure works or a therapeutic agent is effective. Then we use the PICO framework. Okay, the PICO can also have the last one that had PICO T, which is the time for what we were taught yesterday. But in evidence synthesis, it can be PICO S. Okay, which is the design, the study design. The study design, because each time you ask a question, you have to match the question with the type of study. Okay. And then when you finish finding the study, writing the question, which is you will try to know why they are still here. Then, based on the PICO criteria, you define the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Remember, in primary studies, we are including or excluding individuals. In systematic reviews, we are including or excluding studies. So these are criteria for including studies or criteria for excluding studies. Then you do a search. Most times, we do what we call a search strategy, which essentially are kind of assumptions you make in terms of the terms, the keywords and terms that inform the PICO, the P and the I. For instance, malaria and the severe malaria, cerebral malaria, and maybe it's attenuated, the I is attenuated. So all those things should be in your search strategy. Then the database, okay, the time frame you want to start, like the review we are doing on COVID. We started from early to 2020. We're not starting beyond 2020. Okay, so the time frame, the databases of interest, sometimes also, you want to ask this? Yes.
But that was what you used for your
No, there's no. Okay, I will tell her. So, PICO means. Sorry, I made an assumption. I think I'm using. So I hear you very well. So, PICO simply will refer to, like we were trying to tell you. So the P stands for the population or the patient. Okay, you want to study. And you have to take into account all the characteristics of the population. It only male or female, all age group, a particular age group. Even like in this issue of SMC, is it the Sahel or the area that malaria is seasonal? So in framing your question, if they're not just simply for everyone, then they are the characteristics of the P. Not that you should write 10 sentences, at least something that defines the P should all be part of the question. So it's like a building block. You first write it down, because you take from all those things and then make a sentence and put question mark. That becomes a good question. Okay, the I is the intervention of interest. And it could be a vaccine, it could be a drug, it could be some non-drug intervention like educational intervention, or like urban renewal. I don't know if you know about the guy called Donald Duke, transform states in proximal. So, drainage and everything. So those things can change things. So you can do a review on urban renewal as intervention. So those are complex interventions. Then, and I'll stay with intervention reviews. Then the C is the control or the comparator. Control, because sometimes it's either placebo or the usual treatment. If the usual treatment is chloroquine, they're trying to bring a new drug, ACT, then they control with chloroquine. But if it's a vaccine, then you need to compare it with placebo, okay? Because sometimes you cannot, it's not to give nothing. It's something that kills people, maybe you're giving the other drug that you require, as they say. Okay? And then of course there are times you would have to be nothing, the control may be nothing. Okay, so whatever the control is, you have to define it in your question. And then the O. So P, I, O is the outcome. Okay. So if you are doing, then the S, like I said yesterday, you did T, which is the time. The S is the study design. Because I'm going to show you soon that depending on your study design, your question, your study design may vary. Okay, so that. And when you do your search strategy, you have to build in filters that select your study type of interest. Okay, but the outcome usually is not good for doing literature search because they often don't report it in one form. Okay, if you are doing selection, of course, and you're going to select selection criteria, if you put in the outcome, that if you don't find this outcome, you don't select, you will lose a lot of things. So usually good to leave out outcome, unless when the outcome is the basis for the evidence synthesis. Like there's something they call Rett syndrome. It's an acute encephalopathy that occurs in children who take aspirin. It's rare. Okay, Rett syndrome. So if you are doing a systematic review on Rett syndrome, although it's the outcome, it has to be in the search because you are looking for it, but you don't find it. Otherwise, and this is not the rule of, this is not a general rule, it doesn't have to be a piece of advice. Because you see, your search has to be both sensitive and specific in a sense. So you have to have a trade-off between sensitivity and specificity. So you want to get as much as you can. You also don't want to get too much. Okay, because if you get too much, you can spend the whole year searching, screening them. So in doing that, you don't want to. If you put too much to eliminate things, then you can lose things. Okay, so that's just adding to the next stage. So the other thing about the O is that the I. I'll go back to the I. The drugs we give can be either tablet form, injections, So if this medicine has got different formulations, then in defining the I, you have to say, if it has they have ones they give monthly or weekly, you have to say it's the weekly one you want to study. If you are studying all of them, of course, it puts just the men, and when you do the review, you do subgroup analysis. Okay, so let's go back. And then that answers your question about PICO. Okay, the PICO framework. So the PICO and S. Okay, when you do a search, you do PIS, do literature, this strategy, you do PIS, and you remove the code. Nobody said I don't like the code. Okay. PIS is to wait. Okay. Okay, so let's go. So you define this criteria, then you do the search strategy. Then you have to develop a tool for screening the studies for eligibility. And usually it is based on the PICO framework. So that's why it's critical to ask a question well. So this tool will be used by two people independently when they have the information scientists have searched and given you your search output, maybe there are 1,000 or 2,000 or 500. Then each of you will use those checklists. First, you do a title and abstract screening. Okay, so you quickly go through the text. Some of them are totally irrelevant, so you exclude them down the line. So when you've done, you have a few likely, maybe it was 5,000, it come down to 150 or 25 that look like they're relevant. Then you find the full text. So when you do full text, you have to go through every part of the study to make sure that you don't exclude studies that are relevant. You go through the introduction, method section to make sure you find everything. So first you do a title and abstract screening. So you first do, both of you will do, and then you say in your protocol, I'm going to come to protocol, how you will resolve differences in it. That's why it's an objective way to do that. So say if you found a difference, a third person, or you discuss, okay, whatever, but you should say how you resolve differences. So independently you will search, you will screen. You do first few tests, and you develop a kind of flow diagram to show the reasons for exclusion. Because people are especially at the full text level, because for the other one there are several things just irrelevant. Okay, then you go further to the next one. So you do critical appraisal, which is what I'm going to tell you about today. Okay, what we do at this stage is that we look for the internal validity of the study to include. In the first place, they belong to the question type, okay, the study type, and then you go through, and then usually the main thing we do, there will be many things, because you assess for the risk of bias, okay, and then there are two different tools for assessing for risk of bias of comparative effectiveness studies, risk of bias of single arm studies, risk of bias of qualitative studies. So we have different tools for assessing risk of bias. So you find the right tool for risk of bias. Again, you can assess risk of bias independently and then compare those. If you are doing a rapid review, one person can assess and then the other person will just check through a random sample of what you have done. Then we develop a tool for data extraction. Just like we do in regular primary research, you develop a tool for data extraction. Okay, you extract data and also on the PICO, on the patient side, because I'm going to describe the kind of people that were in the studies. And then, of course, also they extract data on the outcome. Outcome will be continuous variable, or maybe that continuous variable. So in that case, for continuous variable, you extract information about the mean and standard deviation. For counts, you extract information about the count and the standard error of mean. So depending on what you are doing, and if you find a study that's cluster randomized, you have to also extract data that will be able to calculate the cluster effect. Okay, so the size of the clusters, the number of clusters, it will then calculate the intra-cluster correlation coefficient. So all those things, you put them into this, the relevant software used for evidence for data analysis, then you can adjust for the cluster effect. So this is, I'm saying that for data extraction has to vary slightly depending on the type of study you're trying to work on. But then when you form that data extraction tool, you share it with people in your group so that they can share, peer review it, and be sure that the tool is good enough. Then you pilot the tool. Then you sometimes there are some software for doing both screening, software called Confidence. Okay, Confidence. Okay. But these are expensive, so you can do it manually. So evidence synthesis is what we call meta-analysis. Simply means using a statistical means to combine data from the different studies, so you can have a summary effect. So this is not always feasible. If the studies differ, and also assess the studies for heterogeneity, if they are heterogeneous. Okay, sometimes use statistical tests, some chi-square or I-tests to check for heterogeneity. Sometimes just visually looking at them, maybe the rate of participation vary, or things that are obviously different. So you cannot be combining apples with oranges, because you will misinform. So if they differ too much, then you will not do meta-analysis. Other times you don't have data enough to do meta-analysis. But if you do, and there is homogeneous data sets, then you do meta-analysis. Then you interpret the results by looking to either the quality of evidence, and then of course the precision, which is what we're talking about, the confidence interval yesterday. So the review process starts with developing a review protocol, and then you have to register the protocol in the public domain. There are big review groups like the Campbell collaboration, the Cochrane collaboration are the biggest ones. And so you can register with a review group, or you can also register the ones available publicly, like the Prof. The Prof is the biggest one. It's based at the University of York. And it's free. Because of the COVID pandemic, a lot of the times Your registration will be delayed because they are focusing mostly on COVID-related content. Ultimately, register it because when you publish, the editors in high-profile journals will not publish as part of review. It was not registered in the public domain. And for Prospero, if you've done your search, your standard for full search and certain screening, they don't qualify for registration in Prospero. So before you can do background search just to do knowledge improvement. But when you decided to do the standard search and then you started to screen, unless you're a liar, you cannot register at Prospero. So they will ask you, have you done this? You say yes, you say sorry, I can't register this. So it's good to bear that in mind because if you've done your screening, then you can't register. They don't do prospective registration because they believe you're already starting in the review, so why bother to do that? Anyways, the people who don't care about integrity will say no, but that's not good. Because, you had an angel watching, they will just head off. And you're your own. So they are watching. Okay, so protocol help us to minimize the bias of changing the goalposts as we go down. It does not mean that you cannot make changes. Okay? So data-driven bias is something that happens in every review work. It has to be very interesting and then you spend all the time writing about it. But if you read the protocol, you focus on what you plan to do, so your objective. So one of the things to do in assessing for risk of bias is the reporting bias. So if you have your protocol in the public domain, they will find it and compare what you've reported to see if you left out some important outcomes. Then they will downgrade your review on that outcome for reporting bias. So people are quite thorough. So if you don't have your protocol in the public domain, then they can't do that. That's why editors don't want to publish it because their review can be compromised. Okay. Let's go. So sorry. Okay, it's moving now. So I'm talking about assessing for heterogeneity. So the differences in characteristics of the studies investigated by looking at it. You can have statistical heterogeneity. This I test comes in from 0 to 100. Okay? The higher the number, the worse the heterogeneity. So if the unit is less than 20, for instance, the I test is less than 20, it's heterogeneous. Then you can also look at the forest plot. The graph that you have from meta-analysis is called forest plot. If you look at it, you can see that the studies that are going in one direction, either the direction of effect. These are going in different small, half of them are effective, half of them are not. Then you can say there is heterogeneity. Okay, then of course, the design may also be the reason. Look at the study design, and there are confounders that are not considered. And I told you about reporting bias. Okay. There's something called funnel plot. Okay, that also is used to assess reporting bias. But if you have less than 10 studies in your systematic reviews, your funnel plot will look funny. So have a proper funnel plot, you need a minimum of 10 studies. So then it's not really, it's just a guide. The real thing is to find the studies, find the protocols, and check if all the outcomes are being reported, if they are available. Data synthesis. Okay, so there are two models. One, the all make assumption. The fixed effect model of the assumes that the studies are the same, which is not true. There are same characteristics and all that, so it's called fixed effect model. Okay, so and just using a software, so you just switch the software to the fixed effect model. Okay, so we will leave the random effect model as the default, because it makes adjustment for differences in the studies. Okay, but whatever the case, you have to report the model you use. So when you have a lot of heterogeneity, of course, you must use the random effect model. And then, of course, I've talked about you can actually have forest plots without meta-analysis. So you just add up these things, then you switch off the evidence synthesis command. So it brings out your plots, then you don't have the diamond at the bottom is the summary effect. So that diamond will be missing. And to use to make evidence synthesis when your studies are not similar will be misleading. People would make decisions that are wrong because you made that, because they look for that diamond. If it doesn't exist and you put a footnote that is not summarizing because they don't look alike, but they can now give each of those plots for whatever it's worth. Now, when it is not possible to do the evidence meta-analysis, you can just do narrative synthesis, which means just write stories, short sentences about whether they work. In fact, you don't do a vote count. Vote counting simply means 10 out of 5 work. No, that's suggesting that maybe it's great. No. For each of them, you say, this study that has 25 people worked. This study that has 15 people didn't work. So that they will take each of them for what is work. You say, out of 50 of them, 17 works. So you could be mislead. Maybe the 17 that work were funny works, okay? So narrative synthesis should avoid vote counting. Not be specific. If they're all related, if they say, okay, all the case control studies tended to show effect, that's okay because you have something scientific that joins them together. Just giving a count and saying 20 work and 20 didn't work would be misleading. But then there's a tool called the SWIM guidelines that now help people to do synthesis for, the SWIM guidelines. So if you Google it, you go to BMJ, I'm sure, and it's in the open access part of BMJ. Because before the SWIM guidelines, everybody would say, we did narrative system, and there are 200 different ways of doing narrative system. So to find a common way, there's just 9 steps in the 21, 9 events, 21 steps, okay, in this SWIM guidelines. Okay, so I thought about assessing the quality of evidence. So these are the criteria that enable you to either downgrade if you are dealing with the randomized control trials. So the risk of bias, if there is risk of bias, then you downgrade. If there's inconsistency, it's of course when the evidence is in different directions. Okay, have many of them that are saying yes, and that happens often when you have for confidence intervals for proportions, when it includes 1. Okay, when the interval includes 1, then you downgrade for inconsistency. It is for means, when it includes 0, you downgrade for inconsistency. But if you just look at the forest plots and they are going in different directions, you downgrade for inconsistency. Indirectness means that you don't use the context, because this is what you do when you want to use the evidence in a particular way. Maybe these things were done in a place completely different from, maybe you're doing habitation and then it's about some drug that doesn't work in black people. And you can say the context doesn't apply. So you downgrade for indirectness. Something like that. So imprecision is what we're discussing yesterday about confidence intervals. So when you have very wide confidence interval, it means that the truth can be 1 or 500. It means that's really serious, isn't it? That confidence interval of 1 to 50. It means this in Canada, the true results, the true event could be 1 or 50. So that's why it's not precise. So the shorter, the narrower the confidence interval, the higher the precision. I've discussed communication bias. So for each of these things, you can downgrade from, can be high certainty at the beginning, downgrade to moderate certainty, low certainty. The lowest is very low certainty. So guideline groups, when you give them very low certainty, then they now put their expert opinion, because they think that this cannot be trusted. Okay? But it can still provide a guide to them, but they cannot make a decision on that. But very low certainty, the conclusions is likely to change. You found the correct evidence. So that's why it's important to grade the evidence so that their guideline groups are better informed. Because there is somebody that is very prominent and very, very influential. I'm not looking at Prof direction. Looking this way. So if Prof says this we should do this, the guideline, who are going to challenge Prof? But if the grade that it says very low certainty, so Prof will say that because he knows that he should done. But if he left it that way, somebody who's prominent can say, I think we should use it. That's why it's always good to try. When they give evidence to the guideline group, it's good to grade it for certainty of evidence, the quality of evidence, so that at least they will be guided. It's up to them to do what they want to do with it, but they should be guided by the internal validity. Okay. All these things measure internal validity. Okay, no. The indirectness actually measures external validity. Okay, this is just what happens when you use a corporate software called Review Manager to do assess for risk of bias. So each of these things, yeah. You trying to see what type of study this is? Yeah, so you can see the whole lot. But if you look at, there's a checklist called the stroke guideline. You know stroke? Yes, okay. If you look at the stroke guideline, most of these things will be what we find in stroke. And when I give you the quality, the critical appraisal tool for both cohort study or case control study, you'll also find some of this in that. So these are the things that you do to assess whether that study has high risk. The green ones means they have very low risk of bias. The red ones, then the yellow area is unclear because they have not provided enough evidence for us to make a judgment whether it is risk of bias or no risk of bias. Okay. Sorry, I think that should be. Any time I hear, please time in. You should always time people. Okay, okay, please, I'd like to be time so that I don't violate your. Okay, so these are just showing some of the things. This is my own review. Our review, not me, but these are review on the chemo prevention, intermittent prevention in places where malaria is seasonal. So this is the forest plot. These are the plots for the individual studies. Okay, you can see that they are in the direction of. It's called they reduce the incidence. That's why it's going this way. They reduce the incidence of malaria. What the outcome of increase? I'm not seeing the top anyway. Okay. So the meta-analysis, the summary. This is a summary effect. This one. So when you switch off the meta-analysis, you can still have all these plots without a diamond. So nobody can have one single effect of going to propound, any theory about effects. So that makes people unable to make that judgment. So it's always good to try to switch off the meta-analysis if you are not sure that this study is. But this is a good one. Let's look at that heterogeneity. What is the eye test? Hi. 89%. Yeah. Okay. And the guys, this girl, you see, there are so many studies. We were two groups working on this review. One group was in Ebola, was in Liverpool and Calabar. The other group was in London. So we disagreed on one, and the WHO guideline group invited us to discuss. Because they found that this thing reduced mortality. We found that there was a trend toward reducing mortality, but the effect was insignificant. But not significant. Then the WHO couldn't make that call. So they asked our groups to have a meeting. So when we met, we found out there was a study excluded included. Of course, I think they have the upper hand today because that actually does reduce mortality market. Okay, so I'm going to leave this. You already know that, but schematic reviews are good. That's what it's saying. They also have some downside. So when you combine these studies, some studies that they have been done for you, when you appraise them for risk of bias, they are still in the systematic review anyway. So they bring that weakness into the conclusions. So you cannot do without it. So long as you've done it well, people are able to identify that and also give it the judgment it deserves. And then you know that a lot of studies that are out there that have not produced effects are not published. So it means that we'll be missing a lot of studies. So, and some studies, sometimes we do only English language search. So the ones in Chinese, the Russians are not included. But you can't do anything about it. We just take it. Sometimes we do, then you have a lot of money and a lot of time. If you don't have too much time, then. Alright, so sometimes those who are doing the review are not knowledgeable enough to put all the criteria that they require. That's why the WHO, like when we apply for these grants, okay, they require people that have the content knowledge, people who have expertise in infection prevention and control. So we have to partner with people in NCDC. Okay, so most of the people are at Calabar and NCDC that were there. For NCDC, they have a lot of people that with infection prevention and control. So you need that so that some things we don't know, we could have done written a stupid thing there that would embarrass everybody in Nigeria. Because have somebody there who has got the content knowledge. So anytime you come and review, you have to have somebody with the methods and then somebody with the content. Experts in the field has to be there to save you the embarrassment. Because for the things you don't know, you can write something that's really stupid. When they read it, they'll just throw away the review. They say, this is for you, and idiot. Just save yourself that by finding somebody in that field, making part of your review. So you can find those strange things and everything. Okay, I'm going to skip that and just talking about primary studies and studies. Okay, now finishing now, okay? I'll just finish very soon. This is just to say that we have a software that we can use. It's called Review Manager and it's free. We have the online version. The online version is only available to people who are doing copy reviews because it's linked to a database called Archie. Archie is the man who actually had led to the formation of public collaboration. So we call that database Archie. So the online one is live on Archie as you're working, you can update live. But you can download an offline version for free. So they ask you when you're like, are you in a copy review? You say no. So you need to download. I want to see on the best. It's not available to manipulations. It's all so you have to click it. Unlike if you're using data, if I use data to do spy review, you need to be very good. The writing goes. This one is also click this and it's out for it. Okay, I talked about grade, how to grade it. The grade group is done a lot, and they have variants of grade. We have the grade for qualitative studies, which is called grade support. We talk about the campaign collaboration, which is another. And they do a lot of things about educational intervention, social sciences, economic evaluations. Okay, so they are very good. And this one is the last one. Joanna Briggs. Joanna Briggs is based in Australia. It was formed by nurses. It's very strong. It's very strong. That trust women to do well. So those are there's another one in the University of London, Institute of Education called the AP Center. We do a lot of things for social sciences, on educational research. They're also very, very good. Okay, and then these are just the types of review. There are a lot more than this, but reviews can be on comparative effectiveness, can be asked or not asked. They can be on diagnostic accuracy tests, can be quantitative studies, also have scoping reviews. And then if you are dealing with complex things that cannot be addressed by only one of those, they can do these methods reviews. Okay, they're often theory based, but again, it needs a lot more people in it to do those type of reviews. And the use of complex interventions like, city renewal, urban renewal, like multiple interventions sometimes There's a group called 3IA. You know, their interest is in evaluation. They are big, and they commission a lot of these big reviews that require complex interventions, worth millions of dollars. So those ones really require too many people inside the review. In their network meta analysis, this is good in the sense that you can have like 10 studies that have we one study compare what is it, P2C? Yeah. Yes. So that stuff, you know, you can compare it with placebo or with something else. And it's network analysis, all that single arm, you pull it out, all the single arms, and single arms of something else that was used to treat, you know, and then you compare them. So it's huge. There's a lot of indirectness because you are comparing to studies that are done in different places. But sometimes that's all you have. All you have are different studies, the arm in different ways. So there are people who have expertise in network analysis. And it comes, I remember this study, one of those guideline groups who and I did that, and I they did a mystical job of it. Okay? They will have what they call the living systematic reviews. Okay, current reviews are so a lot of questions living because we update as new evidence. We will not update as frequently as living reviews. These ones are updated almost on a monthly basis or 2 monthly basis. And the WHO has got a lot of living reviews now on COVID. So as things become available, to update the guidelines, the reviews. Okay? So this is the last part of our talk today, critical appraisal. So it's simply, it's the thing we do at the section of the corporate review when we do risk of bias assessment and grading of evidence. That's what you do in critical appraisal. There's a paper published in the 80s, I think. It's called How to Read the Paper. You know, it was published in, I think, German. It was published in German. So those are the beginning days of, you know, making critical appraisal a skill people should learn how to read papers in a way that identify, you know, validity. So it's a process of assessing and interpreting evidence systematically to consider validity, results, and relevance to your own context. So, like I said, when we do systematic reviews, we try to assess the validity of look at the methods, also look at the results. We don't really have much to do about relevance. When you do critical appraisal like we will later today, you also have to consider relevance. And then, so there are put in the folder that I gave to him tools on how to do critical appraisal for systematic reviews, for randomized control trials, for cohort studies, for case control studies, for diagnosis studies, for economic evaluation studies. So these two were developed by a group called CASP, Critical Appraisal Skills Program, that are based at Oxford. They have grown really big, and their tools are available for free online. I'm sure when you see it, you'll see it. So I just wanted to use one of the listings. It's just my way of saying that. My way of saying that the type of question it asks. The type of question it asks can be treatment or prevention-related questions, diagnostic questions, prognostic questions, etiological questions, and screening questions. Would require the best evidence to be somewhere around the systematic review of what is randomized control trials. So when you do appraisal, you are aiming for that type of study, for that type of question to achieve this. All right. So I probably will skip this. Just for you to know that when I listen to all the things you are saying about your study types, many of you will probably be doing case control or cohort studies. I've not seen anybody plan randomized control. But whatever it is, so you want to also, when you do critical appraisal today, you can choose your studies from either case control or cohort study, and you can also use randomized. But the example I have is on the randomized control trials. Okay, so this set of checklists called has critical appraisal skill program, and most of them have like 10 questions, 11 or 12 questions that enable you to determine whether the study is valid, number one, okay, whether it's valid, and then of course whether what the results, whether they describe the result very well, and the last part is whether it is locally applicable with the work here. Okay. So I'm just going to whiz through this example on randomized project list. So you start with question one, which basically addresses the question of where was there a focus question. Where will you find it in the paper? Focus question. Background, introduction, isn't it? Okay, so that's where you find it, so that's fine. So it says, was the assignment of participants in the intervention randomized? Are you going to look for it? Method size. Okay, so these are the things to consider when you do that. Okay, you ask, these are the sub-questions you ask in your group. If you are trying to appraise an RCT paper, you have to go online today and get one or two for your group. You can have maybe one RCT and one cohort, and then you try to appraise them together. Okay? And then we'll see how you do it. So the first set of questions are addressing the validity. So this is talking about whether there are losses to follow up and all the patients that are accounted for. You know what they call intention to treat analysis? Many of you probably know. So when you randomize a patient to one arm of the study, the intention is that the patient will receive that. So if you do intention to treat analysis, regardless of what the patient was treated, you're still going to analyze the results on the arm. Okay? The drug industry doesn't like it. Sometimes it makes things spill out of what they want to do. So you can do actually the protocol analysis, which means that if people were excluded, then they remain excluded, they don't get into the study. But the default is that if you are publishing for the mainline journals, if you do what they call non-inferiority design, they expect you to do analysis as per protocol as well as for intention to treat. Okay? But by a privilege, maybe you go to look at protocol. For superiority, as non-inferiority, they always want you to publish both the intention to treat analysis and the protocol analysis. So that's what they're trying to see. If they accounted for all those, then we can have lost fellowship pull up like 20% or more. You see a lot of questions. If they account for them, that is good. Because if they told you they were 20% lost to pull up, that's a good information for you to judge them. But sometimes it's not even existing. They didn't account for the patients. What happened to them? Okay, then talking about blinding, then they blinded the assessors and those who are giving the treatments. Okay, so like yesterday when we talked about randomization, we said that usually when you randomize very well, the people are equal on both sides, they're similar. It's not always true. So you always have to look at that first table background, baseline first. So see if actually they are similar at baseline. But that will be part of the quality checks about validity. Okay. There are differences, then you should also be able to see the description. The other one talks about how the experiment is done. So let me just go ahead talking about whether you reported, talking about power calculation. Remember yesterday, talked about power calculation, what is undertaken. Okay, so this is where you begin to talk about this related to the precision and all that. Okay. So the precision estimate of effect per given group, and you look for that in the confidence interval. The wider it is, the lower the precision. Okay, so a lot of studies that are done well always make every effort to account for adverse effects. Okay? So, like if I prepare this thing I do for WHO, and you go to the guideline group, I will not summarize the harm. You will summarize the benefit, they're going to throw it away. because you have to summarize benefits and harm. Because they only have to do a risk benefit analysis. You want to see if the trade-off between the benefits and harm is such as to favor continue with that intervention. Okay, so but if this study is not reported, like you are an expert in that field, you know that usually there's a side effect, but that's when it comes out clean, no side effects at all, then you can raise questions. Because you know that most of the times, like 20% of that, they're only zero, it raises a question. So those are the small things we just know. And then, of course, this other side talks about applicability. Does it apply to my content? This is the you have come to pick or again. Look at the patient type, the dosing, the population, and they similar. Okay? So I'm going to leave you now, and then if you have questions, this is what the group work will look like today. So you do a search when the time comes. Can I go do it before now and find any study in all these areas, either a systematic review or a primary study that RCT, diagnostic tests, and we have put the checklist for all the study types in the folder there. So you select the two that applies to the one you choose, the e-copy, and then look at it. If you want to print for your findings, you can look at e-copy. So you use that to judge both the validity and the relevance. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very illuminating presentation. I'm sure you have questions or comments. Okay. Let's go to our computer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 for that. So, thank you so much for. Sincerely, it's very interesting listening to this. My question, number 1 is, for systematic reviews, what's the marginal study? Research study that actually look at, I think you said 10, but not too sure if then also the time frame, how recent, the 5 years, 10 years, study. I think this last night answered one of the questions because I'm looking at the search engines, that we can use. Now I'm seeing Proclaim Library. I'm aware of the Google Scholar, Binary. So maybe you still share light on that. The last is trying to marry the studies now. Is it like it's mandatory that you get similar studies, maybe like in age, in gender, or method use, or I just get as many as different studies I can do out there, irrespective of the methods or the population use. Thank you. I hope my question is okay. Number 2 is number 2.
For this great presentation, one of our members has always told me, Johanna, you have to start systematic review. Johanna, you have to start doing systematic review. I really don't have any idea about systematic review and analysis. This is really expository for me. But I have a little challenge. This still seems very theoretical to me. Yeah, it still seems theoretical to me. It's so beautiful, I understand the points, but most of the points, not all. So I was wishing, I wish that there would be a situation where a practical demonstration of this process using an engine or something, a particular research question or this will really go a long way. Thank you.
I want to thank the lecturer, for the beautiful lecture on systematic review. I've heard of it, but I really do not know so much. And I want to say that I'm happy that I'm here. And from what has been happening since yesterday, I can say that this is worth it. My question is similar to the first question on the number, the maximum number. But now I will say, is there any limit? Maybe the minimum number of studies to include, or the maximum number of studies to include. And if there are guidelines as to choosing the selected studies. For example, there are some topics that are very popular, like diabetes. One will get a very large number of publications on diabetes. Okay, since diabetes is very popular, can we say you can go as high as 5,000, including or selecting 5,000 studies? Then for some that are not too popular or common that you can't find so many publications on, can we say that, okay, getting 5 or 10 will do the job? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It's very impressive. I want to start by saying, can you just please tell us the difference between the scoping review and the systematic review? Okay. Yeah. Secondly, I saw that you judged so much on RCT, sports, case control. So what's your take on cross-sectional studies if you want to carry out a systematic review? Then concerning use of search engines, I know some people use Google Scholar, and we tried some reviews some time ago, and we found out that the result that came was very large. When we go further, when we set further, we found out that some people said probably use 10 pages of Google Scholar. Is that right, or what are the things that can guide on using that? Then lastly, I want to say that I'm really impressed with this lecture, because I was in a talk one day and the elders were even saying, you young ones, you are not qualified to do a review. It's meant for those that are working. Thank you very much.
Let's take this set of questions and come back to Thank you very much for. So let me take the first one that talks about the number of studies. Okay, there is no minimum. Okay, what happens is that if you have only one study, you're going to report it. So if there's a demand for evidence, even if you're not, you're just going to publish it. But it's become a problem when you have too many. What you would consider, are there already systematic reviews on that subject? Okay, if there are, maybe what you want to do is what we call an overview. So you do a systematic review of systematic reviews. That's a methodology for combining systematic reviews. Otherwise, what people tend to do is to make it difficult for studies to be included. Okay, so you raise the bar in terms of quality. So you may exclude studies based on quality. Okay, usually most times people have included before you do quality assessment. If there are too many, then of course you can have a lot of things to do. But then the point is that you may not be really needing to do that. Sometimes you randomize. Okay, when you selected maybe 500 studies people. So because you don't have money to work with 500 studies, so you randomize and say, I'm going to take 100. Maybe you have to say, maybe first of all, stratify like we did in Asia. You stratify to see studies from Caucasian studies. So you randomize along that line and take some. But most times we are dealing with few studies. So the problem of too much studies, if you are amazed that all this large number, you will exclude like 95%, you have only 5% left. So often you tend to have too few. So having too much number may not be a big issue. When you do, you can increase the quality of the criteria for inclusion. Okay, but there's no number. I used 10 when I was talking about making a forest plot. Okay, you know it's like a funnel plot, sorry. Like a cone where you do the plot. So you cannot give that shape if you have less than 10 studies. So there's no need to do a funnel plot for assessing publication bias. So that's what I'm saying. If you want to do that statistic, you should have. If you have fewer than 10 studies in your review, you don't have to do that plot. And that plot is not necessary. You can actually check to see if they have bits of publication bias by looking for the published protocol of those reviews. Or because you're an expert, you consider some outcomes very important and yet they are missing from that review. They can smell it around and say there must be something they're hiding. Because if it's something that should have been published and they didn't publish it, they can downgrade for publication bias. Okay, because most times they should have assessed it. Then for the database, it depends on where you are. If you are here where we don't have money to pay for databases, then you don't use PubMed. But Google Scholar is good. And it's not great literature. Google Scholar is somewhere between great literature and standard database because most of them, they're academics who have published and have put their materials out there for you. So Google Scholar is good. And information scientists are the ones who can answer the question as to whether you're going to use the first 2 pages. I don't know enough to give you answer to that. There are people who have expertise in using Google Scholar. Maybe they already know how to find. The Google Scholar, the one for dealing with literature, they also ask us to search Google Scholar. The Google is very good because anytime you search Google, they have all their mechanisms of making sure important things come up. If you definitely, I cannot answer that question. Then for the databases, of course, there are many. They also, I don't know if you have Inari in your institution. Yeah, Inari has a lot of, the CINAL database, which has got a lot of things. They also have this MBase. MBase is the European equivalent of PubMed. Okay? PubMed is American, that is the mainline. Okay? So MBase is always for sale. So if you have European partners who have MBase, okay, university, like if you go to Governor University, that's one of the best places to teach or school in Nigeria. Because they pay for these things. So if you are at Governor University, you can publish in any of these high-end journals because they've bought already space for you to publish. Yeah. So it's a good place to be. And I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying it because I have. So I've heard about the practical demonstration. Yes, we're already doing that. As we go through this week, you see how many there are obviously lectures that are held online. If you go to what's it called? What's one you use for YouTube? Yeah, go to YouTube and write realist review. Realist review, I don't mention realist review. So that complex form of smart review. Or it could go scoping review. You'll be amazed how much of full lectures you can get on scoping review. But beyond that, we run a course that's in Calabar on occasionally. We do every year, but the one for this year is already held. And there are a lot of other places. Some of them you have to pay. Ours, I think, is for free, or maybe you pay just 10,000 for the if you are in this on-site. So what I mean is that if you're coming to stay with us, just to buy you a meal or buy you for lunch, but if you are doing it online, I don't think we charge you for that. Okay, but then the other thing is the maximum number that they're talking including scoping review. Just as the name sounds, they're just trying to, there are two ways. When they started, scoping reviews are just meant to find out what is there on a research question, okay? How much publication is there? So it basically counts in this topic, there are 500 RCTs and 20 case control studies. So it usually precedes decision to do systematic reviews. So if you found nothing at all, you say, well, this review will be a 0 outcome review. But they progress now to have now scoping reviews that actually identify outcomes. The British are very good at that. If they wanted to verify definitions about maybe the definition of systematic review, they can do a huge scoping review on systematic review definitions. So they also present themselves for things that are just like if you wanted to find the theories around madness, okay? Like having theories of not that I can be real political madness. Okay, if you wanted it, you can do a scoping study maybe on that. You will find a lot of stories. So those are the kind of things. Scoping reviews differ from studies that they basically look at general issues. They don't look at, they try to map. It's a mapping review. It maps the available evidence in a given area of question. But having said that, some scoping reviews have, in addition to that, some outcomes. So they become an end in themselves. So everyone who wants to do scoping review can also Google the methods. Because you do the same thing, but you just chat what you've got, and then if you want to include outcome, maybe you have to be selective on the outcome you want to include. Again, like I said, there are methods you have to find out. In those things. If I missed something, then I'm sorry, but those are the things. So while we're here, there's something we can see it together in terms of in your approach, then we can keep doing it until we see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Round of applause, Prof. I think one thing is very clear. You can learn everything in one session. Corporate review is supposed to be like 2 weeks where you stand, you sit. Practically, they will put you through day in, day out. So perhaps maybe the Naima Foundation will look at that as well. And if there is fund, they can organize something like that for people who will be. What do you say? Well, let's wait and see. I can't take that picture. But one other thing I want to add is that while we look for our roof, we must know that we must be interested in also investing in our own career development. It's not all the time you have to wait for someone to bring the fund for you. If it's something you can afford, like the course Prof was talking about, if you think it's good for you, it's going to advance your career, try to sacrifice a bit for that to help you in the long run. And Professor Prof gave an example, was it 2 days ago, that you have to go for a conference in the US because she wanted to meet somebody. That's part of investment. To pay for flight, to sell tickets, it's part of investment. So you have to invest in your own career. You want me to ask a question before? We are running out of time. Okay, let's take it. That's the answer we're going to take. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Based on the need for scoping review, is it acceptable to step down quality assessment for scoping reviews? Okay.
Yeah, you do limited and critical appraisal. You still do critical appraisal because you need to say that you found maybe 20 RCTs, but 10 of them did not, they didn't consider location. So you have to be selective. Otherwise, you just lump it. So either it's yes and no. Yes, because you do some bit of critical appraisal, but it will not be detailed since you are scoping. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation and all the questions that have been asked. My comment is just to say that you have mentioned the I'll just advise that try and some of these things you think and let's try and list them down and the overall report this portion at least some of them remind the issue about that. Another area I would suggest, because what we are here to do is capacity building, in the area of branchmanship, but also some traditional areas. In putting down that list, we also try list out at 9 months to keep some of you in the loop, because I know that from time to time, NIMA gets calls for fellowship. I know that in the past 3 months, there have been about 6 calls for fellowship, different short-term grants, that you people might not be exposed to or have any knowledge to. But if you link up and link this team up with NIMA, so that anytime such adverts, such opportunities come up, it can be a mailing system where they can share it, so that those that are interested and also
Thank you very much. We have to move now. Okay.
Okay, now let me just raise my voice. Regarding Google search, the Google Scholar, I saw some articles, systematic reviews that say you can take first 500. First 500. I've seen some articles. I mean,
Okay, thank you very much. The round of applause also about. So the next presentation is quite very important. A lot of research has been done over the world. Only my percentage of them are currently very useful to humanity. So I want to ensure that the outcome of our research become useful to us. So I'm starting this presentation as Principle of Implementation Science Research, and that will be presented by Professor Juliet Iwelumor.
So it gives me great pleasure actually to bring this lecture because I consider myself as an implementation scientist. And when I teach it, I actually teach it from an outcomes perspective. I teach it, so now I'll share what some implementation outcomes are. These are just some, there are many. And the outcome in particular that's of interest to me is sustainability. I think I started to allude yesterday that I used to work at the UN, and I was the one person that closed out the UN's response, culture sector's response to HIV. So imagine years of what UNESCO was doing at that time around culture and HIV. And for some reason, the person that closed out that response was me. And so it just struck me wrong that we're not doing something that we ought to be doing. Because when you think of culture, when you think of HIV, that the entire UN should be thinking it's not a priority. It's just not, it didn't sit well with me. And luckily around that time, there was the move to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so that culture sector was just wrapping its head around how can you make culture, right? This thing called culture sustainable. And so when I left the UN and came back, when I was training in the US, when I left the UN and came back, keep in mind, I had those issues of sustainability at last week when I was doing the malaria work, right? When the mothers were already asking me, why are you leaving? You know, like malaria is still here. Instead of all these kind of thoughts, why are you leaving? So I had that issue. Then I go to the UN, and again, I'm being forced to that issue where things continue to seem to end as if HIV just is gone. You know, like as if we shouldn't understand why a cultural response to HIV is ending. And then all of a sudden now we are moving from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals, but yet this entire section doesn't even know how to last. And so when I came back to the US and trying to understand what to do career-wise and all that stuff, I came across Professor Iwelumor. I don't know somebody, one of two people may know him, right? So he was my mentor in terms of especially when I returned back to the US. Before that, I had the other PhD. I had a PhD mentor, but at least in terms of navigating how I would go across my career when I came back to academia. You know, he was doing his Ghana research at that time, if you know his work. He does hypertension research in Ghana. And at that point, I'd done malaria, I'd done HIV, and now, in order for me to get back into grant writing, the one person that I knew that had a grant was doing work, hypertension, and Ghana. And so talking about systematic reviews and all of that, my first paper with him was a narrative synthesis, because I'm not a hypertension specialist. I don't do diseases per se. Even though I was doing malaria or HIV, I'm not a disease-focused person, right? But I needed to understand the visual of what they were doing with hypertension in Ghana. And so yes, the first papers I wrote, actually two of them, was a narrative synthesis on what is hypertension in sort of the whole of Africa, but then specifically in West Africa. And I think we did also a systematic review of trying to understand what are the gaps, what is the whole. So before I could even enter his group to get a better sense of what they were doing, specifically in Ghana, the one condition was you have to get a sense of the literature, to then write it up, to make sense of it. Because and it was a good exercise for me because you cannot write a grant without a good sense of the literature. And in the sense of making sense of that story of what's the gap, I find out too that sustainability was another issue, right? That there have been people doing hypertension research. I'm thinking of the late Jacob Flandreau, right, in Ghana. He was one of the first that did community-based response to hypertension, right? The SALT studies in the early 2000s, and the very, very big people that started going into the communities to address hypertension was Jacob and his crew. But then even at that now, their studies did not last. And so I was now seeing that there was a gap, right? That people keep doing these work, and for some reason they don't last. And so that's how I literally then ended up entering this field called implementation science, where the programmatics, I guess my programmatic objective of my work is how do you sustain evidence-based interventions in resource-limited settings. And for me, there has to already be an evidence. So in other words, you cannot enter this field unless somebody has done an RCT on it. So all that thing is telling you about paying attention to the RCT. It's the evidence, right? For you to then say you're coming into implementation science, you have to be coming from the point of view where somebody has done the evidence. Somebody has said it's worked, right? Going into the communities to talk to them about SALT, it's worked, but we don't know how to last, right? Going into churches to talk to pregnant women, that's another study I was involved in. Going into churches to talk to pregnant women about pregnancy, it works, but we don't know how to make it last, right? So if you think of it, the reason you're searching for those RCTs is to see that there has been evidence that has been done in everything you're doing. So in other words, nothing you want to do is new. You're not going to be the most innovative researcher today. I'm not, because every single thing you're trying to do has been done in one shape or the other. Hence why you have to systematically look at the literature, right? The reason you start from what has been done is so that you understand, okay, so what am I coming in to do, right? So if you don't search the literature, there's no point reinventing the wheel if it has been done, if that makes sense. And so your question then becomes, okay, maybe they did it in the clinical setting. I need to take it to the community setting. Do you understand? Maybe when they did it, they didn't have a strategy to make it stronger. So if I'm coming now, I'm not interested anymore in the clinical outcomes. I'm now interested in some of implementation outcomes, for example, is what I would say. So in other words, if you think of the topic, if you really, really do your research on the topic, some form of evidence exists, right? It may not be in your forefront, you may not even have thought of it, but some form of evidence exists. And then your job is, how do I take that evidence to people who often don't have access to it? That's what implementation science is at the end of the day, right? And you will start with the systematic review. And when she was saying systematic review, I said it's dead on arrival for me if you say you want to work with me and you don't have a systematic review. You can't have a conversation because I need you to search the literature. It's your chapter 2 of your dissertation. So I supervise people that do PhDs too. We cannot have a conversation if you are not vested yourself into the literature. And so your first year of coming to work in my group is just that, a systematic review of the literature. In fact, we have today Friday is your meeting. Twice a week, everybody, about 15 of them, everybody's job for the year. I don't care if you do it in 3 months, if you do it in 12 months, you have an entire year to write a systematic review. That's 12 months in a year. So if you manage your time well, at least you can get one done. You understand? And so that's a condition. Everybody has to. Because for us to now say we're doing implementation science, if I do not know what has been done, then I have no business being in this. So that's like a given if you want to then say you want, because the key for you is there's a gap. Do you understand? People know what it is. A lot of the evidence exists. It's not today, it's not new. We're not doing it, so that's the guarantee. There's evidence, we're not doing it. We try to close the gap. That's as simple as it gets with implementation science. And you try to close the gap with maybe some strategy, one discrete strategy or multiple strategies, but ultimately your job is to close this. Because if you don't do this is the thing I was saying about 17 years. It takes about 17 years to close this, right? And so many people don't have time to wait. And if you look at the US in particular, that 17 years 95 billion is being spent every year on just research alone. Does that make sense? 95, I mean, just by the time we add times, how many times you in Nigeria? You understand? That's an intensive amount of money. So I don't even know if Nigeria has it in its portfolio, what it will do. But that's how much is being wasted every year because we're not translating our real world evidence into practice. Does that make sense? And at the same time, people are dying. Meanwhile, there's evidence. It's a real life and death thing at this point. People are really dying. Meanwhile, there's evidence. We're wasting money and people are dying. So you see how even the US has a return on investment. In fact, of all the RFAs that has everybody participate, so RFAs is request for applications. Of all the RFAs, the US has if you go to grants.gov, right, and you just click on NIH's grant.gov, there's usually about 1,000 requests for application in any given time for one thing or the other. But the one request for application that is consistent, so if I even go back, NIH has, the National Institutes of Health is like NIH, like US, it's part of the US government Ministry of Health, if you see it that way. And it's the research arm, almost like NIHA. It's the research arm of the US, right? And so they spend, their portfolio is about 40 billion a year. So they spend about 40 billion from what the Congress has allocated to them to do research every single year. So imagine that. And in fact, it is the largest funder globally. So in my grant class that I teach, from all the things we've looked at, it is the largest funder of research globally, anywhere in the world. So they have a 40 billion portfolio. They spend a lot of money doing research. And at the end of the day, they too are concerned that their money is not giving them that return on investment. Does that make sense? So the one RFA that has, so there are about 27 National Institutes of Health institutes. The one request for application that has almost all of them and the many offices participating in is implementation science. Because they care that their money keeps being wasted. Does that make sense? So if you see some RFAs, maybe one institute is participating, 2 institutes are participating, the RFA for dissemination and implementation science may have all 27 and their many offices participating because it's of vital interest to the national economy that anything that they invest in has to have because they care too, it's their money. You know, nobody wants to keep spending money on this same issue and you're not getting to the bottom of it. Does that make sense? So translating the real world benefits to people, right now it's incompleted. We don't know how, many people still don't know, and we've been spending so much energy doing this work that we still haven't gotten to the bottom of it, right? And so it brings us then to this field called implementation science. I guess before I go, can I gauge what people may think they know about implementation? Have you heard of this field before? Yes. What do you think about it? What one word comes to mind?
Translating and research evidence to practice.
There you go, translation science, and have anything else?
Changing behaviors.
Changing behavior, especially at the levels, right? Yeah, whether you're doing multi-levels, right? At the individual level, provider level, health systems level, whose behavior should we be changing? Okay. Anybody else? Impact, right? That's return of investment, right? Why am I spending all this money on work and I don't even seem to have an impact? You understand? Nobody wants to keep wasting money. Even they themselves, they like it. And the reason they even care about this one is because NIH fund is taxpayers' money. You understand? It's not like they have the money sitting somewhere. It's people that are cleaning, people that are eating. Everyday people have contributed their taxes to this budget that if they don't keep having a return of investment, is dead on arrival, if that makes sense. Right. So that's it. Implementation science is translation, impact, levels. Whose behavior are you changing? The provider, the health system, organization, even policy makers, they all fall in here, right? So what's the point of doing your research if your policy maker doesn't even know you're doing research? And so usually when they teach it, they often teach it as closing the gap between what we know and what we do. So this idea of the research, right? The research already kind of has a sense of what we know. Right? But for some reason there's a fissure and we need to get to the bottom of that so that we can actually give the care that it is. You know? And so one thing they would say, and almost like what I started, is that you kind of need to know where you fall on that, right? Knowing that it's the effectiveness of the strategies that you're going to do that matter. So not necessarily the clinical outcomes, even though people do pay attention to the clinical outcomes, it's these other things that need to get that evidence to people that matter. And so from the beginning, you have to have an evidence. Right? So I don't know if you guys want to take the time to look at this for a moment, almost like a subway train of where you fall on that. From the beginning, you have to have an evidence. So if you don't have an evidence, it's a no for you, right? Would you agree? But the field demands that you have to have an evidence, right? And so if that evidence hasn't, so then the question is, has intervention or practice of interest shown efficacy? If it hasn't shown efficacy, then you're doing efficacy research, right? If your answer is no, then you're here, right? If it has shown efficacy, okay. Has intervention or practice of interest shown effectiveness? So the reason I'm learning is from time. So either you're doing, people may have done efficacy research, may have done maybe effectiveness research. So they know it might be a no, maybe no partial, yes, right? And so the reason this is important is because depending on where you fall, if it's a no, that maybe you're still doing effectiveness research, you're not yet ready for implementation. If it's a no partial, then you're probably doing something called hybrid. Well, you're still looking at those clinical outcomes. So let me take it back. From intervention, some clinical outcome was looked at, right? So your blood pressure control, HIV cell testing, something clinical was addressed here. That's why it's in evidence. Does that make sense? Something clinical happened here, right? And because it happened here, it was probably in efficacy research, right? So that makes sense. The thing is, if you don't have that yet, if you don't have an evidence, then you should probably be here. If it has some form of evidence, then you're now here. Now the question is, how rigorous was that evidence in terms of moving to the next phase, right? If it's that, we still don't know if this way is working, then you're here. If it's that potentially there's something, but I still need to go back and address some aspects of that clinical outcome, then you might be doing a hybrid effectiveness. Now, and I'll talk about this a bit. I'm just giving you the lay of the land. And if it's that, oh no, it's been effective, right? We just need to really get into people. Then maybe you're doing something mixed methods. Maybe you're now focusing on the designing the implementation strategy, testing them, ultimately looking at all those other outcomes that I will share about. Does that make sense? So there's efficacy research, which is usually the beginning, right? We don't kind of have an evidence, we're trying to make sense of an evidence. There's the effectiveness research, right? And there's the implementation research. Does that make sense? When I came into the field, I went straight then into implementation research, partly because the people I was working with in Ghana, like I said, they were already doing effectiveness. So he already had a cluster randomized control trial happening in Ghana using task shifting strategies for high blood pressure. So if you train nurses, right, with some strategies, they're meeting patients, the patient's blood pressure will be reduced. It was already here. I then said, okay, now in the real world setting, can this work last? Does that make sense? So that's where I came. I came straight for him to address his implementation. Does that make sense? So that's just one, you kind of need to know where you fall on that and then begin from there. So, and partly again, this 17-year gap is real, something that I think is what we were talking about yesterday. The knowledge exists, is the practice that we have an issue with. And usually, for balance and borrowing, it takes about 17 years to close that gap. And so many people don't have 17 years, right? And really what causes that 17 years is, whether even the funders care about funding this topic, all the way to you getting the funds, all the way to you actually doing the study. And you find that people are dying in between. 17 years is a long time to be waiting for research to get into practice, but that's the reality. And then you find out that even when you go from research to clinical translation, these gaps is what implementation science is trying to do. I'm just refreshing you from that yesterday. These gaps is what implementation science is trying to close ultimately. And so why are we doing this? It's because we need to overcome those barriers to adoption. Why is it that evidence exists and people are not adopting it? Or it's not reaching the people that need it the most? It is because of this return on investment is real. 40 billion on research and you don't have anything to show for it. That's a real problem. You understand? And just even ethically, what's the point of doing work that doesn't last? You might as well not even go to that community. Like, what's the point of going to spend $3 million, even if it's for 5 years, and you have no plan of remaining? You will become part of the problem. You might as well not even go, because the people are better off not even knowing they have blood pressure than for you to give them medications for 5 years and then you disappear as if their blood pressure is gone when you disappear. Does that make sense? And so sustainability is forcing you to think of that lasting beyond the 5 years. If that makes sense. And the reason I'm saying 5 years is because that's what funders do, right? They fund your research for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, assuming once 5 years is done, boom, you've solved the people's problem. And in reality, how many years since I left Nigeria for my dissertation on malaria, is there not still malaria? I think I was talking to somebody, we don't even still use malaria rapid diagnostic tests, right? And meanwhile, that was what I did in 2007, right? I worked that to last 2007 to use malaria rapid diagnostic tests, and look at where we are today. And it's like as if, I don't even know if people even know that stuff exists in Nigeria, right? You understand? And that's the real life dilemma. More children are being born. The children could be having so many other things that are wrong with them. There's a tool called malaria rapid diagnostic test, at least at that time. And yet we're not using that as we should, right? Because the child could have many other illness. But yet when they came to the hospital, the first thing is it's malaria. In fact, meanwhile, the mother has done medicine at home too, giving malaria drugs before they show up. They show up to the clinic and it's still malaria. You understand? You still give the child more medicine, and yet it's a child under 5. So there could be so many. I think that's what Dr. Ezechi was telling the group the other yesterday. What group are you in? A, right? That now Chika is the person at the lab here has developed a dipstick that can help identify 500 causes of fever. I think that's what he said, right? That's happening right here in Nigeria. The problem is you don't want Chika now to spend 17 years before that dipstick gets into the market, because that would be the reality if something doesn't happen now. Does that make sense? All right, so again, it's a scientific study of how to adopt and integrate evidence-based health interventions into clinical and community settings to improve patient outcomes and ultimately benefit public health, right? And so if you think of what I just said again before, could this work? So in the pre-interventions or the efficacy, they're still trying to figure out, does this thing work? This is the traditional pipeline, right? Does it work, right? Everybody's still measuring efficacy, effectiveness. Can this work? Does it work? Can this work? Does it work? By the time you want it to get to real-world evidence or relevance, right? This is how you're trying to make it work, right? And so many things you ought to be doing along this continuum to make it work. Local knowledge, generalized knowledge, these outcomes of adoption, implementation, all of that is supposed to help you make it work. So implementation science is really here. You want to make that thing, whatever that thing is, work. All right? And so when you then ask, okay, so what kinds of questions, if I was to now ask you guys to come up with a research topic, what kinds of questions should I be asking? Find that a lot of it is barriers and facilitators. Something works, but for some reason it's not getting there. So what are the impediments to the adoption? Reach the cost. What are those impediments of getting that thing? If I use HPV screening, we know it works, right? And I'm not the new one. I didn't make this up today. There's something women can do for cervical cancer, whether it's pap smear, whether it's HPV, something works, right? But for some reason, there are barriers and facilitators to getting it to those women. That's implementation science. So the evidence is already HPV screening, or your pap smear, that I did not make up. Right? That's been in existence for far too long. But for some reason, many women still don't know about it. Right? Do you see what I mean? There's something that exists, though, that's an evidence that has been in the system for far too long. Right? If we don't even want to use it, we can think of liver cancer, for example, hepatitis B, right? If we could only vaccinate all our children immediately at birth, right? At least that reduces their chances of getting hepatitis B and ultimately liver cancer, which is endemic. At least hepatitis B is endemic in this country. So what does that mean? Every mother should make sure their children are vaccinated for hepatitis B, especially birth dose, right? It's in the national system, and I want to believe it's an immunization strategy. But do you believe that many women still don't get their children vaccinated today in Nigeria? Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm trying to say? It's even in the national immunization strategy that every child being born should immediately be vaccinated for hepatitis B. But you find that some women, whether through lack of awareness, they don't know, a bunch of barriers and facilitators are impeding some mothers to vaccinate their child for something we know works. That's an implementation question. You see where I'm coming from? So many things exist that we know works and can reduce your chances of getting something in the future. HPV vaccination, hepatitis B, or they exist. But for some reason, there are barriers and facilitators to even making women that may have, first of all, most women don't show up in the hospital for birth, but at least for the ones that do, there's still barriers and facilitators to getting them to ensure that their children get vaccinated. That's an implementation science question. And it could be that we need a strategy. Maybe mothers need peer support. Other mothers need to be talking to mothers about hepatitis B vaccination. Do you understand? That's one strategy. Or maybe we need to train nurses to be talking to the mothers about hepatitis B. You see how I have two strategies now. Peer support versus tax shifting to nurses, for example. Right? And so then your question is, will peer support to work better if I use it for hepatitis B? Will peer support among mothers, so mothers talking to mothers, would that be better than nurses talking to mothers? That's an implementation question. Does that make sense? And so I'm concerned about that strategy. Which one will work to get more mothers to get their children vaccinated? And then maybe if you find that peer-to-peer, mothers to mothers, right? Since I'm creating an intervention here, maybe mothers to mothers is the thing that actually works. So then your question is, well, it's not like I think hepatitis B, mothers are not giving birth tomorrow, right? Even if you fund me for 5 years, in 5 years' time, more mothers will give birth. And so I need to make sure my peer-to-peer or mothers-to-mother intervention remains, right? You find that I'm concerned with sustaining it, right? But then what is the cost of this mother-to-mother intervention? Do you understand? Like, just because you said it's workable, it's a strategy that makes sense, so it might be expensive to beyond those 5 years. Further, I'm concerned with the cost now of mother-to-mother intervention. That's implementation strategy. So such that ultimately the outcome is that I want mothers, my clinical outcome is that I do want mothers to make sure that their children get hepatitis B vaccination. But it's the strategy that I'm concerned with that is much more important than just the vaccination. Does that make sense? So, but if you're studying the strategy and you're studying the vaccination, this is where you fall under the hybrid studies, right? Where you, depending on which one you do, whether am I concerned more for the strategy or am I concerned more for the clinical outcomes, that's a hybrid implementation trial. Is this making sense? Any questions? So, in my section of teaching, so actually when I teach implementation science, usually people would have taught at the beginning, so I'm more comfortable with my outcomes. So this, you people made me work yesterday because it meant I had to think from the beginning. I usually come in after other people would have laid the groundwork because where I'm comfortable is really sustainability. So this is me going back to the beginning to see how do you actually teach this in a simple way. And this paper by Jeffrey Kuran, at least he tried. It's an implementation science paper made too simple. And he basically said, if lay people want to understand what this is, at least let them start with this. And I don't know if you guys are giving them resources. At least I put some resources at the end of my thing. This one is one good one to at least keep. So that way, if you ever forget what implementation science is, he's done a good job of giving you a single visual aid. Again, I'm a very visual person, of what the field is and why you should keep in mind. This is it. So he said when he teaches his class, it's very helpful to use non-scientific language around what implementation science is. And so that intervention, though, my mother to mother, that is the thing that matters. You see that? My mother, so if you remember what I did in the previous thing, I said I have two strategies. Mother to mother or nurses. But I find out that mother to mother is much better. People like it. And so that's even the one that's much more cost effective. That's the thing that I'm concerned with. Mother to mother. You see that? So that's the thing. Effectiveness research has looked at whether the thing works, so maybe other people would have looked in other places too, whether mother-to-mother intervention works with depression and many other places. So even if I may never have done mother-to-mother, right? It could be that somebody else has done mother-to-mother for depression. You know, like mothers, postpartum depression. I want to believe they've done mother-to-mother interventions around postpartum intervention, right? There's even maybe RCTs on that. I can borrow it, so I'm not reinventing the wheel. I can see what they did with mental health around mothers to mothers and depression and say, okay, I want to take that thing and bring it now to hepatitis B screening. So, so maybe my evidence is that mothers to mothers work when they need postpartum depression. You see that? All I'm now trying to say is, so there's a whole thing called adaptation. All I'm now trying to see is if I can adapt that mother-to-mother intervention for hepatitis B. Does that make sense? And so effectiveness, or maybe from the postpartum, you could have gotten an RCT already, right? Implementation research in particular, looks at how best to help people in places really do the thing. Is mother to mother, how can I get many more people doing mother to mother? Is that simple? Is that making sense? Mother to mother is my evidence. I need more people to do mother to mother, right? And then the strategies, should I be training more mothers? Should we need more mothers? Those strategies are the stuff we will try to do to keep doing the thing, right? So maybe I might have super mothers, right, who are like the super trainers of other mothers to do mother to mother. Do you see what that means? Maybe they were mothers to mothers that worked with me in the beginning, though. Now they're like my practice facilitators. And I want to take this out to more places. And those mothers are now the ones that, train the trainer really. So that's why I'm saying nothing is new here. Those mothers are now the ones training the new set of mothers that come, right? And then we look at whether when we do all that, does that really work or not? And so it's the thing, there might be all these, and another thing about implementation science is you cannot do this work alone. You're going to need partners. You're going to need partners. Nobody does implementation science alone. Ultimately, you're closing a gap, and then you're interested in this process to close the gap. And then the field that's giving you all sorts of outcome strategies and contextual determinants, which are over, that they figure are the things you measure as you do the thing. Does that make sense? In terms of the thing, I said mother to mother. The thing could be a pill, it could be a program, practice, product. So these people that do diagnostic tests now, that it could be a product, you understand? It could be a vaccine, it could be policy, it could be procedures. All of this exists for a reason, right? When a country has a national cancer control plan, somebody put together a whole bunch of evidence and said this is what the country should do for cancer, right? That's an evidence. Your job is, are all the nurses doing that? And that's implementation question. So for example now, I think Nigeria has a national, I think there's a new, even hepatitis, there's a brand new viral hepatitis thing that just came out probably not too long ago, about a week or so ago. And it's supposed to help the country work towards eliminating viral hepatitis by 2030. That's a national thing that the Minister of Health has signed off that everybody should be aware of,
right? If we need to get to the bottom of hepatitis. So that means, I think one of the conditions is we need to get more mothers to really commit to the birth dose vaccination, right? We need to do catch-up screening. How do you, so many children have still not caught up on their hepatitis, right? We need to catch up. We need to be screening healthcare workers. If you're working in the healthcare, I hope you have been vaccinated for hepatitis B. So there's a lot of things the country has said, and as you're doing that, make sure you're participating with people, your people-centered and all of that. So it even gives you mechanisms. That's another field too. So the country has guidelines with mechanisms. The problem is that probably most nurses or healthcare workers may not even know that that policy exists. See how that's a simple study. My job is, how can I get people to know about the policy? That's implementation science. Is this making sense? It's really not you going to say, I'm going to be the king of hepatitis B now. So let me go create a whole new plan. No, there's an entire country plan already for this issue. The problem is that local government area in one corner is not even aware. I mean, I think people may have come across it. Many of you are not even aware that this thing exists. Yeah. You know, we were talking about yesterday, mid-adolescent, low adolescent. There's a strategy, right, that the country has for who can consent or not consent even as an adolescent, right? You have to be 16 for the country guidelines to be able to participate fully in an intervention without parental consent. I bet you many of you don't even know that exists. But it exists in the country. So sometimes implementation science isn't that I have to go reinvent the wheel or create something new. It's just that something exists and the people who need it the most are just not aware of it. So my job is to figure out how do I get things to those people, right? It's also concerned about the users of research. So much more important than what you will do is who's going to use the research. So who do you think is a key user of the research you do when it comes to implementation science? Who is it saying? The population. Okay, good. Who else? Who are the users, potential users of this information? Policy, somebody exactly. Right? Because if policymakers all of a sudden act funding, right? And if you told them this thing is cost effective, I would hope they put the small money into that thing. Right? But that's after you've given them evidence. Does that make sense? There's a whole technical group for HIV, right? They all really sift through the evidence and then say this is what the country should do. But it depends on that evidence. And so whatever you do with implementation, especially if you're going into the realm of cost and cost effectiveness and all of that, that informs what then policymakers do within the country. So the potential users could be everybody from the policymakers to people to your practitioners to managers. All of them have a vested interest in using that thing. But then the truth is there's a gap, and sorry this one might be blurry. The truth is that there's a gap because even though that thing is effective, it's not being adopted, it's not being implemented, the people that need it the most, so like that viral hepatitis thing that I said that just came out, right? That every mother needs to be aware that bedrose vaccination is crucial, right? They may not even be aware. And even if you then create a mother-to-mother intervention, you may not even know how to keep it so that it lasts. So that's the gap implementation science tries to address. And it uses different processes. So you can start by exploring, well, is mother-to-mother good for my setting? You understand? What will make mother-to-mother helpful for me or not? Right? You can then prepare, and then ultimately implement and sustain. You do all that though with people. None of this is done in isolation. So implementation science, yes, it's not one of those that you can set out and say, I'm going to go do one small thing on my corner. No, you're going to need partners. Because at every step of the way, whether it's evaluating who needs this or not, if you're saying you're doing it in the local government area, you need to make sure that local government chairman is aware, right? Or the MOH, right? Before you can even get into the community, the medical officer of that community needs to even be aware
that you're there. And say you want to train nurses, right? Part of your job is to again let that medical officer know that I need your nurses to be aware that there is this viral hepatitis package that the government says. So all of that, whether you are exploring whether this is a good topic, right? Or whether you then prepare, or whether you then implement, or whether you then sustain, will need leadership support and the buy-in too of the providers, those nurses, as well as the mothers. Does that make sense? And depending on where you go, you will find a lot of bottlenecks and hurdles. That's everything about implementation side. It's not easy. It has a lot of bottlenecks that will, from your leaders, all the way to your program. It has a lot of bottlenecks that will make it tough. But it's still worth it because many more women need to get their children vaccinated. So really that impact will work. Right? If we can get to the bottom of hepatitis B in particular, which is chronic care, it will require you to do what you can to overcome those bottlenecks. Right? What else? And then the thing about it is that the context will matter. What you would do in a clinical setting is definitely not what you would do in a community setting. There might be policy or so, like in other words, if I'm not paying attention to what is in the national plan for viral hepatitis, then I come with my own thing, right? You see that at the end of the day, the country won't even care for me because I wasn't paying attention to what they had in place. You understand? And so the context of where you are matters tremendously with implementation science. And I say that because oftentimes we approach this field with a deficit mindset. Like I think the people where you are going to don't already know about hepatitis B and heard those vaccinations. Some people actually may know. It's just that they may not know about the latest information that is in the plan. Does that make sense? So you don't do it as if people are ignorant to what already exists, or people are always deficits. So the reason you have to pay attention to the context is because there might be assets, right, within that place. So they might already be doing some form of mother-to-mother as well, but maybe they're doing it for depression. And so it's like, how do I build on your mothers-to-mothers for hepatitis B? And so you see how you're using their assets that you didn't pay attention to because you think it's just one small local government area. There might be something they're already doing that works for them. Your job is to key into that and have their buy-in to do what then needs to happen. In other words, not every place is bad. Sometimes there are things going on that is actually working. Otherwise, why would women keep coming to this place? Does that make sense? So implementation science forces you to look into that mirror often. And then strategies. And the strategies are as complex as they seem. From whether you are using evaluative strategies, adapting. And so again, that they've done mothers to mothers with depression, mental health. We now need to do for hepatitis B. You might be adapting. You might be training people that train the trainer to be able to use it, right? You might need to actually go meet the mothers directly to say, I need you to be aware of this intervention. This hepatitis B is important to you, to us all, I need you to be aware so that you can use it. We may need to change the structure. Maybe there is no structure in place within that clinic that pays attention to hepatitis B. So maybe your job is to work with them to change it. You might be providing assistance, that facilitation, that's super trainers, right? Super trainers that have worked with you in mother to mother. You now need them to train others. Stakeholder relationships. So early adopters. So who are the champions that need to help support the clinicians? They might need a little checklist to remind mothers. You understand? And then some places do incentives, financial strategies, nudge. The kind of things you need to nudge people to remind them to use this. All of this are potential strategies that implementation science is interested in. You understand? So if you notice, none of it is clinical. Because that's already been done in the evidence. Do you understand? If by the time you're coming to this field, you are concerned with strategies. Which strategy will work for my thing? Does that make sense? I want mothers to mothers. Should I be giving them incentives? Should I be nudging them? I don't know. At least that's what I would then be concerned with. Behavioral economics is what they call that, right? Or maybe I need to work with mothers to train mothers to know about the significance of hepatitis B vaccination. So at least for implementation science, it's those strategies that are important alongside the clinical outcomes. In fact, some people may even, so the hybrid three, may even, not necessarily though they may collect the data of the clinical outcomes, what they are really, really concerned with is the strategy, right? And so now here comes the outcomes. So even if you've done all that, you have your thing, it works. What are we measuring ultimately? Why should anybody care? These are usually the outcomes. This is not the, I mean, when I was in a meeting with, so this paper was written by Iwelumor Proctor. I was at Wall Street 2 weeks ago, and she would say, you don't, even though this list is here, it's not the most exhaustive list. And so the author of this paper, 2000, and I have that as a resource, the 2011 paper by Iwelumor Proctor, a whole bunch of people, and they listed outcomes that the field should pay attention to. So whatever that mother-to-mother thing is, make sure it is feasible in your setting, right? Make sure people are doing it with fidelity. Make sure it reaches penetration, reaches the people that need it the most. Make sure it's acceptable. Make sure, and this is where I really come in, make sure it's sustainable, right? Make sure that once you even do it, it will be adopted, and always pay attention to the cost of that thing. Does that make sense? You don't have to do all of them. So this is the implementation outcomes framework. You don't have to do all of them. I, in particular, I really do this. You understand? Whatever intervention I'm working with, mothers to mothers, you name it, I test. I am concerned with how you make that thing last, right? I am concerned with sustainability. So people are concerned. So the Ghana project now, they were concerned with adoption. How do we get more nurses to task shift once they identify patients with hypertension? So adoption was a big one for them. In the new one, we're going to be doing costs. You know, we want to do HPV screening and vaccination. Cost will be the big one for me. And this is not to say they haven't costed what it takes to do cervical cancer elimination in Nigeria. In fact, we're going to have an entire document on costing the national strategy. But if I'm now going to do it as my own intervention, I care about the cost too. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, what's the point of doing this evidence if I cannot give a good sense of the return of investment? Right? And so this is ultimately what many people, once you have your strategy, once you know the thing and you know your strategy, this is helping you measure the impact of that thing. Does that make sense? Any questions? All right. I'm getting somewhere, don't worry. Okay. And then all of this to say that your theories, so they again, people, the heavyweights of implementation science will say you cannot do any of this without theories. And honestly, there are too many. I'm just going to start by saying that I'm not a fan of too many theories. But I mean, they have their paper, they have a paper by Nielsen that gives you a sense of all the theories that you should pay attention to as you are proposing an implementation science work. Because it's dead on arrival if it's theoretical. You know, so you have to pay attention. Am I using evaluation theory, classic theories? They all exist, and there's too much for me to say I'm teaching. That's an entire field on its own, just the theories within the field. So I highly recommend you looking at this paper for a sense of all the theories. So as you think of your strategy, as you think of how you're going to measure your strategy, first of all, as you think of the thing, as you think of the strategy you will use to do the thing, as you think of how you will measure that thing, you need a theory to guide you, if that makes sense. All right? And then also think of your design. So the basic simple one is we have some units. Some people got that peer support, like I said, right? Peer-to-peer support. Some people got tax shifting, right? The nurses. You give them mother to mother, you give that same group, and then you just measure. That's just as basic as it gets. If you want more information, I highly recommend looking at that paper because it gives you a sense of other kinds. I mean, the one we're doing here is step wedge, right? For us, everybody gets the same intervention. You understand? And then we just watch over time. What's that uptake like? So this paper at least gives you more sense of that. The fun one for me, I think, is the hybrids, right? So the hybrids basically said there's an intervention, like, for example, tax shifting. I think it works. And I'm actually really concerned about tax shifting of nurses for hypertension.
All right, so I will do that. I will collect that data on how am I training nurses to do hypertension, and maybe look at barriers and facilitators of why these nurses may or may not use tax shifting. That's hybrid one. Does that make sense? So there's tax shifting, for example. I need to pay attention to that for, let's say, hepatitis B. But then I realize that some nurses still may not get mothers to be vaccinated. So what are those barriers and facilitators? That's hybrid one. Hybrid two says, okay, I need hepatitis B uptake is just as important to me as training those nurses. So I'm collecting those two data at the same time, right? And then hybrid three says, I'm going to really spend all my energy on this, maybe training the trainer, so training the nurses to do tax shifting. And so who are those super trainers, right? How are they training those nurses? And even as I collect that information on just really what happens with the whole dynamics of training, I will still collect some data on whether all that helps mothers to pick up HPV vaccination. Is that making sense? This is where a lot of studies actually fall under, where some things might already exist in terms of effectiveness, but I need to still study that thing while I'm really paying attention to the strategy that works. All right? And so maybe we pause here. I think this is what I was trying to do, and say, given everything you've heard now, I know it's a lot. What kinds of implementation science questions may have popped into your head? Just the question. I don't want to know, what is it that you know already has an evidence that you feel we need to do something about? Think of where you find yourself in now. Is there any evidence you feel exists? Remember I gave it could be national strategy. It could be already evidence you're familiar with in terms of an actual intervention. It could be already things you know, right? Like,
Not of an example, like what you mentioned hepatitis B now, that you said even mothers, when they receive the clinic, that they don't, so even some mothers don't even take hepatitis B. I was just thinking, probably cost. Some of these vaccines are not free. So it could be cost. So if they can afford that particular vaccine, they won't take that. They will take OPV. Cheaper.
So what is the cost?
So the policy, I'm thinking, if government will subsidize the cost of these vaccines for the mothers and make it free entirely.
So what I'm hearing from you is that maybe she worked with NIMA, right? And got NIMA to subsidize the cost of hepatitis B, right? And so some mothers got the subsidized version, and then some mothers were given the usual care. Just go to the hospital and see what you have. That's the implementation. You're not comparing the two strategies, where NIMA subsidized the cost for some group, and some group were told, just go usually to your clinic. You see that? Yeah. So that's a question. That's an implementation science question. What happens when some people have subsidized costs for vaccines, and some people were told usual care? You understand? But then I studied this over time and see, maybe is that subsidized cost too? Is that what's really acceptable? Or is the real, or maybe the usual care is really what's even stronger, but maybe there was an additional something too you do with that subsidized cost. Maybe you had navigators, so not just subsidized costs, they were also navigators that worked with these women versus maybe just health education and usual care. Does that make sense? You see how my strategies are beginning to even enhance as I'm thinking it out. I'm adding more to is cost, subsidized cost. Also, go back to your thing of ethics. Everybody gets the subsidized cost for the vaccines. But some people got peer navigation too, on top of that subsidized cost, while some people just got basic health education. So what you are concerned with is the subsidized cost and that peer navigation, those strategies. Does that lead to more women vaccinating their children? Does that make sense? I'm making this on the floor, but you see where I'm trying to go with that. Thank you, that's a good example. Anybody else?
Thank you very much. Nurses that are health workers that are more resident with increased stress, their job, they perform their job better. Their job performance indicators is better. But not all nurses or not health workers are aware of resident building skills.
Which is, tell me, what is the resilience building? So you're telling me there's an evidence base.
Yes.
It's called resilience building intervention.
Yes.
Which helps nurses do what? Can you break it down?
To increase their resilience ability so that.
Which is, you break it down now. What do you mean by resilience abilities? What are they? What do you do in the training?
Okay, the skills.
Yeah.
Like some type of yoga.
So yoga.
Deep
breathing. Okay. And so let's say you created an evidence-based intervention. It was called resilience building skills, right? And maybe somebody not you has already found it to be effective, right? As an RCT. Your job is why Nigerian nurses not using it. And so you may want to adapt resilient building that entails yoga, deep breathing, and all of that. You may want to adapt it in this context for the nurses in this context to enhance their sort of job performance over time, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's doable, especially if there's already evidence elsewhere that exists, and your job is to bring it back to yourself.
Can I just make a quick point? Just to add to what you said. When she's talking about RCT, she's using the sort of acronym for intervention study.
Right.
Because in fact, for implementation study, you can have RCT when you are comparing two groups.
Yes,
but she's using RCT here not to say that you can't have RCT when your focus is implementation outcomes. I hope you understand.
Yeah, it's part of it.
I just want you to be sure because when she's saying it like that, she appears to think everybody understands what she's saying.
Fair enough. No, it's part of it. You're still doing RCTs, comparing groups, even within implementation studies. Is that correct? Sorry if I misspoke. So even implementation studies still do clinical trials, right? I would actually argue they should be called implementation trials, but there's still a comparison and a group that you're still comparing. You give an intervention, you did it, and you're still seeing if the strategy works. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Another problem that I observed about immunization. Most mother starts,
They don't finish.
They don't finish. And maybe one of the interventions that can be put in place is maybe a phone reminder, sending what messages, yes.
Yes. It's been used with PrEP, for example. So you're not reinventing the wheel, right? If you already use handheld interventions in so many other things, can we bring it now to immunization? Yeah. It's a pure, easy, not that it's easy, but in other words, the evidence exists. I'm sure if we just did a simple Google of RCTs, handheld intervention, even from mothers, right, for something else, you will find out that evidence exists. Your issue now is, can I take it to hepatitis B world? Yeah, good.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Study and stratify breast cancer patients for treatment. Patients that have instability in their microsatellite region of the tumor, the FDA has approved one of the first drugs for genetic test outcome. But I'm seeing that patients with two West African countries, at least where I work, have high microsatellite instability region, and most patients are treated with the conventional chemotherapy. Whereas if they have unstable regions, they're supposed to be treated with immunotherapy. So my challenge is, how can we bring this diagnostic tool? What's the feasibility?
In fact, what I heard you say was even the implementation. They're using conventional thing that may not be necessary anymore because some advancement has come. That's also, is that fair to say? You're saying that there's some advancement in the field that we need to be even moving more towards, but yet we keep using the old thing. So that's, I didn't even talk about it, it skipped my mind. There's a whole field called the implementation, where some things are not even necessary anymore. You understand? And so sometimes, in order for that new one to come, we have to understand why they're still stuck with this whole thing that doesn't work anymore. You understand? We need to sort of change that mindset, de-implement this whole thing such that we can make room for the new one. And yes, as you're making room, feasibility makes sense. Does that make? I didn't talk about it. It was while you were talking, I really remembered that there's a whole new area called de-implementation.
Thank you. My question, is more or less an elaboration. Once you have done research and you find that something can be is feasible, but you are stuck with policymakers in the Nigerian context, can you advise how that can go about it?
I will be the first to say I'm taking a class on policy myself. It's an interesting field, and I don't have the answer. So maybe after I come back and take the class, I will explain. Because it's a complex field, not just a Nigerian thing, even there. That I am actually signed up for a class in November to understand policy dissemination, because that too is a field on its own that will require you to pay attention to the audience, the kinds of messages you have to give to them. Because everything we write on our papers is not what the policymaker will read. So I rightfully know I'm handicapped with even studying how you implement policies or even how you disseminate them. So, inshallah, if I come back, I will teach what I have. So I don't have an answer yet.
Well, you asked a very important question, which all researchers are always grappling with. How to translate research evidence to policy, but there's no easy answer here. It's a very difficult hurdle to scale. And Juliet mentioned some of those hurdles in terms of getting the language and the message in the right language and all of that. But even that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be done. Perseverance is, of course, something that is necessary. We keep pushing and pushing and pressing and pressing. But also, in some instances, it might be necessary for you to get policy makers and decision makers to be involved in the design and the conduct of the study to the extent possible, so that you're sort of carrying them along. To the extent possible, that may also influence the possibility that there will be an uptake of your findings. But the simple answer is that you can do all of those. You still cannot guarantee that there will be a policy uptake, but you just keep pressing and keep pushing. And again, part of what Prof. Meremikwu mentioned this morning about reviews and getting the information in a concise way and ensuring that they have the information that shows that this is something that been replicated several times and all of that. This is another way of one of the important things that about implementation science is the fact that it contains cost. It can have cost. You can be able to tell them about cost implication due to something that interests policymakers. How much does it cost? How much? What is it? So those are some of the things you can do in order to sort of improve the possibility that there will be, but no easy with it.
So this, I did include some resources and some good papers that I did. But, this is where I now add the but. This is a giant field. Somebody has a question.
Thank you, Ma, for the lecture. In the northern part of the country,
That's not my lecture.
in the northern part of the country, evidence has been there that shows that when women start antenatal care, but they attend, we find out that the attendance level is very good. It could go to 50, 60, 70, but when it comes to delivery, only few of them actually come to provide the hospital. Information has been available. So, and some of the factors that may be responsible for that include things like issues of male involvement. Some will tell me that the husband has to give her consent to actually provide the hospital. So I think in this aspect, implementation science can actually play a very important role.
I agree. And there have been studies actually that have done how do you include the men in antenatal. I don't even think it's new. There's evidence for it. Your job could be how do we get more nothing men to adopt it? And so you're concerned with the adoption of such an intervention. And so I agree. Male involvement will be crucial. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lecturer. Some times ago, I stumbled on something, and it's an organization, and there was this advert for a vacant role. So I tried to read what the organization does, and they like giving a kind of incentive. I think they are operating in some part of the laws. So say the name of the organization, new incentives. At least if you bring your child for immunization, they transfer some amount of money, like bring your child for immunization, get up to 4,000 naira. So can that one be one of the...
I mean, there was a strategy. You see that if I go back to see now, it's a strategy, utilizing financial strategies. It's an evidence on it that cash transfers work for orphan, children. Like how do you get orphan kids from HIV back to school? They've done a bunch of cash transfers for them. It works. You may then be saying you need to use it for your context. Does that make sense? So it works. The key is the strategy. How do you optimize it for your setting? Right? So, all right, I said all that, and I always like to have a caveat. It's a very big field, so I do agree, and I am aware that even if you're hearing this for the first time, it's a giant. Like how, first of all, I need to understand RCTs, I need to go through systematic review, and then now somehow I need to be doing implementation science. So I expect, in fact, if you're not saying this is too much, then maybe we've not done a good job today. So I expect you to feel like, how can I ever be a David in this world called implementation science? And the thing I was saying to you yesterday, really at the end of the day, it's the small stones that will matter. Because this field is a giant on it. So I think I started out by saying, of all the RFAs that exist, that has everybody vested in it, dissemination implementation science is the one that everybody constantly is. Like some RFAs have come and gone, and then the NIH doesn't care too much about that topic. But this one constantly gets renewed in terms of the overwhelming interest to actually get to the bottom of this thing. But I'd like to have a caveat. And thankfully there was a paper that just came out not too long ago that says even after everything I've shared to you, this field is still very white. I'm just going to be blunt, right? This field is still very much told from the point of view of one-story makers. And usually people in the West, right? This field has all those resources that and I didn't put my own, but I have some. Ooh, I'm moving too fast. It's full with, maybe with the exception of him, Stephen Hopkins. It's full, and that's why I included his own, and I don't know why I didn't include my own. But it's full of people. It's full of people that often do not look like me and you. And I like to have that as a caveat because as you enter this field, especially if you're entering it for the first time, understand that so many people are concerned about diversifying the field, so it needs more representation. It needs to look more like me and you, right? So that we ensure that the difficulties of policy making in Nigeria is not the same as the nearness of big policy making in the US, right? It's two different lens. And so we need to be mindful of how we're doing it, even in our context. So in other words, context matters, even for this field. And I'd like to come back to this paper a lot. This is my PhD advisor, Dr. Kawun Darego, and he's an Edo man. And in fact, in 2007, before the field was getting really its buzz, and then, not even now, it already says that if you're going to do anything in Africa, you need to use an African lens, always, because it's unfair to me to say, yes, the other thing about this field is you need to know what the big boys are doing, but you also need to be mindful of what will work in your context, right? So it's almost like you have to play both sides of the field.
I'm aware that this field exists, and there's a bunch of knowledge in this field that I know I need to have, right? Because you cannot go write that grant when I age, and you don't talk about all the big boys in the field. And so all that information I gave you is what's crucial for you to become well-versed in the field. But even then, they know that there's a problem too, because they've excluded a lot of people. So I was telling Dr. Meremikwu, one of the talks I'm actually having this afternoon is with NIH actually at 4 o'clock, and the idea of it is equity, right? So they themselves know that when they mapped out this terrain called implementation science, they mapped it out for themselves at the end of the day. And if you don't believe me, I don't think I put it there. If you don't believe me, go to the biggest journal in the field and look at who's in. I think we were doing that yesterday, Dr. Meremikwu and I. Just look at who's in that journal, and you find that it doesn't represent anybody that look like me and you in this room right now. And that's a problem, because if hepatitis B works, right? If HPV screening works, how I'm going to reach mothers in my setting will be different from how they reach mothers in the US. And that's just, I need to get men involved in the North. In America, you don't need to get no man involved. The woman is assured. Do you understand? That's a different context that I need to be aware of all the time when I'm doing this work. And so I like to come back to him because he says, first and foremost, you need to be comfortable that their context is not my own, and what my own is just as valid. Does that make sense? And then, back in 1989, and not even today, he had his own model that would say, even if you go into that community, yes, there are barriers. I agree. There are barriers. They may not have the fancy shininess of what you expect they should have. But you have to find something unique within that setting. And you ultimately have to find something positive. Because if you don't, you become part of the problem. So if all you see is that there is no light, that there is this, and this one, and if that's what you're going to write about and complain about, you then invariably add more problems than actually solution to the issue. And so yes, there's a gap, but it's really more like this. It's not as fine as they make it seem. The whole is too much, to be truthful. And so until the line is learn how to write every story only glorifies that. Does that make sense? And I like to leave with that because you guys you have your own gates, and no man should enter his house through another man's gate. All right? Thank you.
Excellent talk, Juliet. I just want to draw your attention to something. When Juliet was giving us this very comprehensive lecture, she showed one slide, but she spent, I don't know whether 20 seconds or 10 seconds. And that is the one where she talked about theories and theories. She mentioned how many theories and frameworks and all of that, and so many, and she didn't want to bother you about it. The point is, this field of implementation science is a relatively young new field. And it's a field that is filled with specialists, and Juliet is one of them. Now, when they are reading your proposal, if you don't have one of them as one of your collaborators, which is minus, and you don't have any of those theories or frameworks, they just don't feel that you are started. So in order for you to actually do this kind of work, you either need someone who is very well versed in the area as a collaborator, or you yourself acquire the skill. And it's not just throwing the theories and frameworks all over the place. So you have to be able to know how to skillfully use 3 or 4 ones that you are going to use. But if they are not in your proposal, you haven't started. They just feel that you are a novice and you are really not in the field. So that's one secret she didn't tell us, but
I think I was going to caveat to say that what you know matters, but yes, you do need those. In other words, I don't do cost, for example. I'm not a cost effectiveness analysis, but I know to find a collaborator that does that. So no man is an island. You have to have collaboration. Like Dr. Iwelumor and I right now, he's the cervical cancer guy. That is his thing. In fact, what he went to do in Sweden, cervical cancer. He's an OBGYN. I'm an implementation scientist. We merge, right? Because he brings in his HPV screening, HPV vaccination. I just bring in the visual of what I think I was telling people, right? Our new study is going to be mothers and daughters. Right? How can we get the daughters to be vaccinated? How can we get the mothers to be screened? I'm concerned with the strategy. Mothers and daughters. He's concerned with HPV vaccination and screening, and then we merge. In fact, we're even then using crowdsourcing, Joe Tucker. You understand? That we are concerned with the strategy of how we get more girls vaccinated, more mothers screened. That's his problem. But me, I'm concerned with the strategy. So in other words, you don't want to do this work alone. Whatever skill set you have is just, I guess, I'm leaving this there to say what you have is just as important. But you need, and since yesterday we've been saying it's teamwork. You need collaborators who also know those other things you may not know. And so find them and work with them. And yes, if they are not on your grant, you might be dead on the writer. So the simplest thing is to write a systematic review. To add to that literature too, that you too, especially if this is the area you want to go, that you, so I'm comfortably saying I'm sustainability because I did the most systematic, in fact, when you were talking about examples, I should share a link of my own. I did the most systematic review anybody has ever done on how you sustain evidence-based interventions in Africa, right? I don't even know how many papers, but at the end of the day, I think we were at 40 papers, right? And we found that only half of all the interventions that have been done since 1990 was my time frame, right? Only about half have a sense of how you even define sustainability. And I was able to publish that in that top journal, such that when people are thinking of sustainability, they know, especially in this region, they know that they can run to me. Even though I'm still learning, and I'm not going to say I'm perfecting yet what I think it means, but I know I have some ground mechanisms, hopefully guiding as I continue to explain. One of that things will be cost, because in order for that thing to sustain, I need to pay attention to the cost of it. Hence why I needed to collaborate with a cost-effectiveness person.
Thank you very much. I was not surprised. I was privileged to enjoy this similar lecture 7 years ago. And that's how fascinating that is. I'm sure there will be lots of questions, inquiries going through our mind. But it's almost time for tea break today. Blessed there's tea break, right? Just want to confirm. So, number one. Any other person? 2. Any more? 3. 1 female wants to speak, right? Okay, 4. So, number 1.
Thank you, Dr. Juliet. Actually, something happened before I came, and I couldn't sleep. I saw a couple proposal from NACA regarding this RSSH global fund. It's an implementation science call for call for proposal to improve quality of services of HIV services delivery in some states in Nigeria. And when I looked at it, I was just confused. And I said, so despite all some of these research skills that I know, yet something has come up and then I can't really understand anything there. I was trying to make some inquiries on how to even make an attempt. I just couldn't. And I just kept worrying. But thank God for the fire in my stomach tonight that I'm here and I'm able to start understanding. There's still a lot of work to do, but now I understand that actually I didn't know anything there. Thank you very much. I will continue.
For this presentation. For me, this is the first time I'm hearing about implementation science. However, a few years ago, one of our students had approached me to say, "Sir, there's so many research that's going on. What do we really do with these things? Do we just publish the thesis and just put on the shelf? Isn't it possible to have a platform, even if it's a radio program or a television program, where researchers can tell the world what they found and how they can implement it?" I was like, wow, that's a good thing. We'll look into that. But I mean, that matter that exists there, because I didn't have any idea about this. So thank you very much. I learned a lot. But I have some confusions. I don't know, probably I'm not understanding the whole thing. So a lot has been said about RCTs. A lot has been said about systematic reviews. And for me, as a basic scientist, I feel that there's a lot that we don't know. However, from the picture that has been created here, it's like a lot is already known. You know, the knowledge is there. There's a gap between what we know and what we do. But for me, I've seen a lot that we don't know. Most of the cutting edge researches are not done in, they are done somewhere else. So my question is, okay, do I need to just do a systematic review of studies done everywhere, and then now I know you know, and then now use that to begin to talk about implementation in our environment? Or do I stick to what I know about the lack of information that we have in our population or in our setting, do my basic research, and allow the implementation scientists to take it up from there? That's number one. Or I have to include the processes of implementation science in whatever research that I have to do. Thank you.
So I think it's a good quandary. I think it's one thing another lady too was referring to yesterday. You know, because basic scientists will always feel that way, like, wait a minute, where do I come in? You are at the beginning. You are at the beginning. In other words, for us to be able to get down to the real world, you are needed, if that makes sense, right? So everything you do at the basic level is informing what we do in the end. The problem is basic scientists and us often don't communicate. And so we stay silent, as if what you do is not as vital to what we do. In other words, if I need to get to the bottom of maybe hepatitis B vaccines, I require you to build it, right? If you are a basic person, you need to be at that end, figuring out what will work and how it will work, but then you need me to really get it to the end of where you need to go. So it's not an either or, it's an and, you know. So I was just explaining to our friend lady the other day, right? I am so passionate about serving cancer now. It really came out from my favorite sister-in-law dying last year, where I knew we could have gotten to the bottom if only she opened her mouth and said, here's what she was going through, and she never did. And so the basic thing we could have done was even scream, right? And she never opened her mouth, never talked until it was too late. And so that meant for the first time in my years of doing work, I went to meet a basic scientist. Right? A basic scientist whose job is to be at that end, right? And now I started having conversations like, why is it that what you've done, right? Not to blame him, isn't getting to who or what I need to do. And so that meant it was 4 or 5, I think I was trying to explain to her yesterday, it was probably the most brutal grant I think I've ever written. I tend to think I'm a grant writer, besides all this. It's really what I do for the most part, my day-to-day. But there are some grants that are so difficult that you run away. This one should have been the one I ran away from because it was so complex to think from his angle and then my angle and merge it together. I don't know the outcome we might feel because ironically it's being reviewed on the 14th. So I may not get it, I may get it, but at least it forced me to have a conversation with someone outside my comfort zone. That's what the field needs. It's not an either or, right? It's not for you to now add me to you. I think you should comfortably stay where you are and I should comfortably stay where I am. But me and you need to have a conversation. Does that make sense? Because we both need each other to get to the bottom of certain cancer. Does that make sense? What you do is vital for me. What I do is also vital for you. But there needs to be dialogue. Otherwise, we stay in our own places. Fair enough.
Thank you, Dr. Juliet. I just have this question. For some of us that probably this is the first time we're hearing anything about the medical science, and we now feel so much excited that there's something we can do with our time and make a difference in the world with all the knowledge we're gathering all over, and we just want to start tomorrow. What do you think we should do tomorrow? No, I just want to start tomorrow morning. I don't know whether I will be able to sleep early again today, or I don't know whether some of us know what I'm talking about. So just hopefully that I have a good night rest and I wake up tomorrow excited about what you said today. What should I be doing tomorrow morning?
So I knew that's why I had to start from basics. So if you went to any of their training, if you Google, like you said, went to YouTube, everything I gave you is as basic as it gets in terms of what's your implementation 101, right? Everything that was before the side where I said what? Every side, everything from the beginning, right, up until the portion where I put David and Goliath is really what you will get in their training today. You know, and I've sat in the rooms with the founders of this field. I wish I can share this. How do I go back? I keep listening to it. I wish I could share the Zoom of my afternoon. The Zoom of my afternoon at 4 today is the National Cancer Institute, NCI. They are really the key leaders of implementation science. Right? So if you look at the people that create, I was trying to go up to that slide up there. If you look at the people whose name will keep appearing on papers over and over and over again, for example, David Chambers, for example, his name will come up over and over again. He's really one of the program directors in NCI, and they created that division of implementation science such that if you even go look at the RFA, right, of that request for applications, that RFA, it's really coming out of cancer, and everybody else is following what cancer did because NCI is the leader of the field. So every resources that are given to you is really what they do. You know, so like from this Proctor paper, if you want to understand just outcomes, right? Okay, I think I know there's an intervention. I think I have a strategy. What should I even be measuring, right? It's not enough to have an intervention. It's not enough to have a strategy if you don't even know how to measure it, right? So I always like to start with this one because she does at least a good job of telling you what you should pay attention to in terms of outcome. These ones give you for non-specialists, so all of you that are brand new to the field and you don't know, him and Alonje gives you a sense of, Alonje is diversified. Alonje has another paper on what it is and how you do it, right? If you just put it in, you will see it. In terms of, you know, where do you find yourself as a beginner? You see that this one is particular for beginners. How do you find yourself in this field? And all of these are publicly available, so if you even put them on Google Scholar, you don't need library, they will show. I was paying attention to that. And then the other one on theory is Nielsen paper is there. So I shared all of that to say, whatever direction you move, there's a lot in the field. The key is to become versed in it. You know, so if it's that adolescent HIV intervention, if I remember, I'm not getting to adolescents. And so maybe I need to pay attention to, maybe could it be that we don't do enough on adoption or uptake? So your systematic review could be looking at all sorts of adolescent HIV interventions, and maybe you're trying to define what adoption is like, to be able to then find your gap to then run with it. You see how you've taken a topic and taken it into the realm of implementation. You said there are these outcomes in implementation. Of all those adolescent interventions, were they sustained? Were they adopted? And if so, how? And that's like a good implementation question to ask. You know, so I will start with these resources. There are lots online. If you just put free training about implementation science, a lot exist, and I will say read them as well. But as you do all of that, don't ignore the but, because some things already exists here. To be honest, sometimes it's also redressing or changing the name of the field. But a lot of this work is not new. Like when I say I'm talking about sustainability, there was a 1990 paper on even sustainability in Africa. Can they get along without us? It's a Thomas Borser paper. When I teach just sustainability, when the heavyweights teach implementation 101, when they invite me, I really come to only teach sustainability. And I start from that 1990 paper to illustrate that anything we're saying about sustainability today has been said 1990, has been said 1998. In other words, people keep saying it and yet we're not getting to the bottom of it. And so I need to get to the bottom of it. And so I usually give them that litany to show that I'm not saying anything new. I just know we're not spending enough time to get to the bottom of it. Does that make sense? So it does require you to do a literature search at the bare minimum so that you understand where you come in.
Number 4.
Thank you very much. Mine is more of a commendation because I observed that actually, truly, the pictures and the storytelling does a lot of magic. Because actually, this venue, I was already getting a bit cold moving into the AC, but when I saw the picture come up, I felt a bit warm. So, just want to say thank you. No problem, like from this one, even from the start. Very much for your presentation. No problem.
That's it.
That should be a research topic. Effect of the lectures on temperature changes in the environment. So we'll take 2 more. This is the last 2 we're going to
Thank you, Mark, for this wonderful presentation. Actually, I wanted to just keep quiet, but something comes to my mind. One thing is that I was actually blessed with ASU strike. Before ASU strike, my thinking and the way I do things in academics is actually different. But during the ASU strike, after 1 month, 2 months, I just sit down. I said, please let me change my style. Let me benefit from this strike. Then I sit down and I start building myself and other things. So during that process, that is when I came to know about this implementation science. When I knew about it a little, then I even saw in the school of implementation science about chronic diseases. I said, okay, let me just apply. When I applied, my application wasn't successful. Now I have seen the winner actually. So, thank you very much for this lecture. But another thing that actually keep coming to my mind is that throughout this workshop, everything that the faculty come and discuss it, you will see that you want to just be part of that. For instance, we have systematic review and model and data analysis. We have to start design. Now we have implementation science. So at the end of the day, I don't know what advice. What advice do you give somebody so that at least, though I think that we can work together. You can also be in systematic reviews, study design, also be in implementation science. But what advice can you give us to be focused? One. And what advice can also give this maybe member foundation, just like the Prof said, to maintain this forward, to sustain it even beyond, so that still the opportunities will be there, the mentorship will continue. Then lastly, I had another experience. Sometimes when we talk about the collaboration, I don't know, we are seeing some of our faculties here. It seems like they are free here. But in the real sense, they are not. You can learn somebody. I don't include sorry, I'm not saying that, but I learned that sometimes you can see somebody, a very good researcher, that you want to talk to. When you send him a mail, forget it. You will not get response. I don't need to be angry because I just say, this man is too busy. maybe is not interested in what I help with. So what can you advise us on that also? Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the excellent presentation. Actually, my question probably has been asked one way or the other. But all I want to say is that, for we to do research to solve a problem, we tend to solve the problem so that it can use to drive development. So the question I want to ask is it compulsory we include implementation study in every part of our proposal or research so that the development we want to see will be achieved?
That question was the first question asked. And it was
I think the thing is, you have to do what, I like coming back to this because this field is a journey. It's a journey for a reason, right? So you're really coming with maybe your stones, right? To say, how do I get this journey? The truth is you will get it, but you have to start small, right? Where you are at the basic level. Understanding that not everything will be implementation science. That's why you have to figure out where you are on that subway train. Some of us might still be efficacy, right? Unless, especially if you say you know what you want to do and you want to stick with what you want to do. I think that's fine. You might be doing efficacy and effectiveness research. That's probably what you've been hearing before. Some of us may want to combine both, right? I know what I want to do, but there's also strategies I want to pay attention to, right? That's where all those hybrids come in. I know what I want to do, but I need to also pay attention to the strategy because we need to close that gap fast. So it depends on where you are. I don't say you jump straight and say, I know this is the giant and I'm going to conquer it with all I have. Just always remember it requires you to start from the bare minimum. You understand? Because that's usually, I think I just said the mother-daughter one. If I say mother-daughter, without you even reading my proposal, don't you all get it? Don't you get it? If I say I want to bring mothers and daughters together for HPV vaccination and HPV screening, without you reading the details of, but you can imagine, you can visualize what bringing mothers and daughters will look like, right? That's bare minimum. Other people may want to be more complex and say, I want to give them 1,000 naira, maybe cost taken. I'm not saying don't do that too, but that might be so much more complex in our setting, and it may not be sustained. But what could be sustained could be greater mother-daughter relationships, right? Because mothers and daughters will always talk beyond even my intervention. Does that make sense? Then minimum is what's needed in the field. Your question about what advice to do, you're being exposed to so many things, or systematic review, RCT, now implementation science. I think it's in those collaborators, right? If you find out I think I gave the story. The person I was working with was already doing efficacy trials in Ghana for hypertension, tax shifting. It was what they were doing. I needed to figure out myself in their bigger story. So, especially with grant writing, nobody writes it alone. It helps when you find other people who have written grants, and then you try to make sense of, well, if this is what they've done, what can I add so that I'm part of their valuable team member? Right? Because maybe the reason those people are busy is because nobody wants you to come and do what they've done. People want you to push them beyond where they are. So if you come to me now and say you want to do mother-daughter intervention, that's what I'm already doing now. What else are you giving to me? Push me, and then we talk. Does that make sense? So I rather have those emails that are willing to push me, and you will find out that you will get a response faster than beating you where you are. I see this is what you're doing. I agree, this is interesting. But have you considered this? Here's what I think would be interesting. Would you be willing to spend the time to talk to me to talk about it? That's how you push the field. You know, when I started doing crowdsourcing with Dr. Iwelumor for eye test, I had never done crowdsourcing, but I had done HIV intervention. It was a conversation with somebody else who does crowdsourcing that pushed me to consider that. So I think all these things you're hearing are supposed to be, those nudges that push you. You have to figure out what makes you comfortable. And I would say you cannot do any of that without a systematic review, 100%. It's dead on arrival for me. Like you cannot be my PhD student without a systematic review. It just, so you do the most basic thing any person ought to do, especially if you say you want to move into grant writing, is a systematic review. You cannot even write a grant without a sense of, for me, when you see my grant, the burden is high. Here's the limits of what has happened before, so the rigor, right? So every NIH is saying that's a key thing, right? You can't just say that there's a problem, but what have people done about it before? There's this whole section, the rigor of your research, right? And so it requires you to pay attention to the literature, right? Before you then propose, here's what I'm going to do differently. You understand? There's a problem. Certain cancer is high. Here's the limits of what has happened before. Here's what I propose to do. That's how you begin to talk about the significance of your topic. I think we do grant writing tomorrow. Hopefully, I may not share the whole. It's what I teach at St. Louis University, how you write a grant. And sometimes you just need to keep those three things in your bucket. And all three of them require systematic review. It's painful, but you cannot move into the innovation of the research if you cannot tell me what has been done before. In other words, there's a legacy to this topic. You gotta pay your dues, right? Because unfortunately, nothing about health is new. Somebody has done it before in one way or the other. This mother-daughter intervention has been done in two places, Peru and South Africa. And so I was able to say this is how they did it in Peru, this is how they did it in South Africa. I think we can do it in Nigeria. Does that make sense? Peru did it in 2014. South Africa actually did it in 2021. So it's even very recent to bring, so I'm not the first to say you should bring mothers and daughters together for HPV vaccine. It's PERCAP study, Peru was really the first study that actually did it and found it to be efficacious, right? Then South Africa did it. South Africa vaccinated the girls and gave the mothers intervention, but it still wasn't strong enough to get the mothers to screen. You understand? I am thinking now, if I bring the mothers and daughters together and actually have them design the intervention, we might get to the bottom of it. But I needed to pay attention to what happened in Peru. I know what happened in South Africa. Hopefully what happens in Nigeria will be a bit different. Do you see that? And that's how you write a grant. Systematic review is the number one thing you will need to do. So I guess if you don't take anything from anything you've heard this morning, understand that systematic review is the key. That's actually where that's how you know you're ready for the big boys. You have to systematically review it. It's my chapter 2. I'm sorry, chapter 3 dissertation. You understand? So when you come to me from year 1, I tell, oh, some of you have PhD. You know what you have to write for yours now. From year 1, you have to, even if it's going to take us 12 months, write to chapter 2 now. Because then I know you're ready to talk to me about what exactly you want to do. I don't have time. We're mother of 4. We can't be guessing what it is we want to do. Whatever it is you want to do, start writing. You have a whole year. Systematically figure it out as a review. Because it's 2 things you're doing for me. You're publishing it and writing your chapter 2. Such that when we are ready now for your exams and all of that, at least we have a sense of where you're going. And the ones that didn't take that advice, I kid you not, 3-4 years, I'm still struggling with them. So I've known, that I start with my systematic review from year 1. You understand? And once you get that, if you want to enter the big game of grant writing, you gotta get comfortable with systematic review. Because you cannot write a grant without the system. And you're there on the right hand. It's that thing he was saying. They know everybody knows who's in love with. Especially if you say you want to write implementation science and you're not citing or a proctor, you're not ready. Right? You're not calling the frameworks, Juliet and Seth and all of them. You're not ready. But it's when you do the literature review. I'm also a grant review. I think I told you, I sit on NIH grant review. And especially if the ones on implementation side, they come to me. Well, there's nothing I hate more than people say, I'm going to use Cepha, and don't even explain how to use Cepha. I don't even read your grants. It's that simple. Because the other problem, that's the reason I don't really teach the theory thing, because it's so much. And so you find people just say, I want to use this theory, but actually not explaining how they will use the theory. You understand? So it requires a lot of reading, and that reading is from the systematic review of the literature. So if you don't remember anything at the end of this month, understand that the one thing you can do for yourself and your career is a systematic review. And it's publishable, and you can put that in your CV as something you do.
I'm the one standing between you and your secret, but please do give me indulgence very briefly. I'm sure I will be here after your secret. Most likely by 2 I have to leave. But it's been a pleasure, and I think I really am seen, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Just to address a few things that you raised, and I wanted to add my voice to that. If there's anything you've learned from here, read it. Sadly, this is not a 3-week series. It's 3 weeks study. So if I wear your shoe, and this is what I'll do, each day I go back and go and read that very topic. So I don't carry over to this one into tomorrow. You can see you can't cope once you carry over. So you learn systematic review. I mean, just take one of the references when you're on your bed to read it, and then you sleep. But don't carry it. I mean, that is how you sink, and then you build when you get back. And as concerning, the young gentleman, I was saying, everything, the systematic review. I think what we're doing here is applying skills, and with time, you'll find your path. Believe me, with time. I started in my role as a child dentist, and that's where I'm still seated. But I don't do clinical work anymore. All of them, I can't do it. I do epidemiology. But one of the things I've found in myself is that I do, if you Google me, I do ethics. I do ethics. I write on ethics. I write on HIV. But you know, one of the things I finally found through the route of ethics is that once there's a new disease, I'm there. Not because I want to be there. After this COVID broke, I said I wasn't going to do it. But so when there's a newness, I find myself there. Because I bring, and I just realized it with COVID. COVID, I speak like this. I'm not doing any COVID. Not COVID. I probably have written over 20 papers in COVID. But I'm a child dentist and I'm not COVID. It's just that I have the competency to write, to do research, to put evidence. If I see evidence now, before you open your eyes, I already know what to write. So that's a skill. And it's not writing because of writing, it's writing addressing critical issues. So you find me always there first in that state. So it's that you should do. Just acquire the skill. And I'm saying that because of this focus on diversity. It's about you now. It's about understanding you, not about university or becoming a professor. That's not it. This is doing research. Professor will come. But if you focus on professor, you just join the leagues of getting 30 papers and going to bed. It's not about that. Focus. And with time you grow. And as you're growing, you're finding your path. And I think for me, that's what you want to do. I'm sure Dr. Yes, we'll be talking with you about how to move the squad forward. But I don't think they are ready to lose a cohort. Just like NIH is no longer interested in losing their 40 billion. I don't think Shuade is interested in losing his how many millions. He's invested in you guys and then you don't do anything. It's going to back you, believe me. But focus now that you're learning new skills. I think it's going to design a program where you will still do maybe systematic review 5 days, implementation research 3 days, and ground. And that way you start to do things. But I'm sure many of you will see that you will need to pull it together. You will pull it together. Everything that you are learning here, you will pull it together one way or the other. And for me, one of the things I've learned is team membership. It's going to be a failure. You leave your program and you second team. It might not be your group members. Okay? So, for example, for me, in my own life, I'm sure there's one lady, Maha, she's in Egypt. Maha knows statistics. If you give me a table today, give me a table, your manuscript is out today. You don't have a problem. Just give me a table, your manuscript is out. But that table will Maha, jeez. So everywhere I'm going in, dentistry, HIV, I carry out. Joe, she knows social science. You see, by the time she puts your word together and put the human language to it, so wherever I'm going, people say I carry out. Nadia, oh jeez, she knows English. But Nadia doesn't have time. So I will wait, even if it's 1 month, 6 months. But by the time she's finished English,
So you see, you have team members, and wherever you are going with people, you go with them. Because me, they know. I just give you table. There's a new guy I have, health economics, in credits. If he finishes his table. But he knows that Meremikwu can just give her the table. In 24 hours, the paper is ready. At least that's what that guy will read. So you must know your team members. But it's not overnight. You start to know. But you cannot live here. Without looking in this place and find one team member, that one will be a crime. At least you in Ekiti, you know somebody that you will do work in Jigawa, or you must do that. Okay. And reaching faculties. What I can tell you in my own experience is that many times the reaching is time wasting. So you see, by the way you construct your letter, your email, I know what to give attention to. I know. Now, faculty, it's not, I'm not sure in my own life I've reached out to somebody that has not answered me. But it's the way you construct it. If you write and say, you see, I like the way you write and I want to work with you, she can't get an answer. Because I don't know what it is that you want to do. In my email, every day, the day I don't have email, I've got 100 email. The day I don't have email, then I'll have to spend time for somebody that doesn't even know what he wants to do. It's me that will start to find it. And they're like that, so the one you will answer, you're not saying, you see, it's you that should let me know what I want to do. That kind of stuff. But if you write in a way that it will attract, I have seen that you study COVID-19. But you have not looked at this angle, and I'm interested in this angle, and I can collect this data. I want to reply you. Before your mail lands, it has gotten a reply. Yeah. Okay. But writing and gisting about what I'm learning about myself, it doesn't work. And one of the things that I'll also share in my own life that gets me the best of response. And please note, I'll get to that. When I publish a paper, I don't do it anymore because it's time tasking, but my very early years, every single reference I use, I go and send with an email, and I share my papers there. I used your paper, thank you. Your paper was a reference for me. I found it, I hope you find it. And then they will reply, I don't have copy. I don't do, because it's time wasting. Those people, not all of them that will put in their email. So I go and I search and it takes time. And when I do it, the conversation that comes after is not good there. And then I do that. But I found it really useful. It might just be one person. Or you know what, because they know that your work, it's likely that they will quote it also. Because you brought your work to their attention, it's their field, for you to have made a reference of them. And then that will take me to the fact that you must disseminate your work. It's a crime, it's an ethical imperative for you to disseminate. See how she's talking about works. All of you will do proposal, you put it in your, it's a crime. Let me tell you why it's a crime. Because you've used limited resources to do that work and you did not disseminate it. Therefore, the next person will do it again because there's an assumption that work is a gap. So you are wasting resources. The person that gave you their time, you are wasting it. And therefore, your generation cannot supervise undergraduate and postgraduate projects. That is a waste of time. It's unethical. Even if you spend only 5,000 naira to collect that data, and then you do it, and then it's on the what you do is on the shelf. It's a crime. Since I became dean, I'm just 1 year dean, but we have agreed to shift. And our students' project no longer goes on the shelf. So November, first week in November, I'm supposed to train all the students to change their manuscript, their thesis to manuscripts. And we have a faculty journal.
That's how we do ours. That's how our dissertation has to be.
Yeah, it's a crime. And that's why we do work. And if you look at the listing, Nigeria does not have data out there. Now, it's not as if we don't do work. But you must acquire the skill and do it. So, first week of November, that's when the first students are going to work, they're going to change it to manuscripts, and the manuscript gets published, and then it's accessible. And then there's no plagiarism when it's accessible. So I want to encourage you. She sat there with me and I'm going to go after her. She said, oh, there's something we're supposed to write before you must disseminate your work. And then finally, you must have noticed that you can never write a grant at the last minute. You're looking at that grant, I'll do it tomorrow, then it's tomorrow.
And you start writing down. There's no grants that gets like that. Not even TechFund. No grants. So everybody here knows that TechFund happens every year. So you must write it 1 year ahead. Because you keep tweaking and improving and getting all that needs to look at it, including English person, everything, and then you can find. I would like to say that if you're going to write an NIH grant, our Nigerian English is not English. It's not a Nigerian English.
I have an editor personally.
Even you, she's even an American woman, how that you talk. How much more Nigerian? And I'll end here. That look, the way we write, it's because it is weak. It's not a wahala. You know, when we are communicating like this, we understand ourselves. Because we come from a world where we say plenty things and don't say it. Yes, it's our nature. You expect people to understand to the dots. That's how we speak. You know, you tell your child, "Mommy, should I take that water?" Don't drink it. Your child already knows that what you're saying is go and drink it. If you drink like that from America, it doesn't understand. So you see, we whine and we say, for example, I say, "Oh, you want to tell me that my mother died?" You see, everything that goes on must come down. And when it comes down, you must go. And I said, what has not gone up? People always go up and, are you talking about my mother? No, I'm not talking about your mother, but you see, it might be your mother also. It is me. It is me. I was now saying, did my mother die? Old people always die. Thank God you are with her. You will still never tell her my mother died. This is how we write. And then they send back your grants, which did not pass. No comment. They can't comment because they don't understand what they're talking about. They won't comment. So this is how we write. You must understand that is how we write. That we don't communicate. But if it is me and you understand yourself, if you write TechFund grants, it's like, oh, it will not be an NIH grant. So let an Oyibo person read it. I had an editor, I used to pay $100. Then it was $100, but now I have members that are reading English. So let's be conscious and look for such a person. Doesn't mean that English people, Department of English, don't English. It doesn't. So that will be my last goal. So it's a accumulation of many things. But I truly wish you well. You must appreciate that you are an exceptional, privileged few. And please, go back and get a junior mentee and mentor them from this process. Don't envy you. Promise me, you just get a student, a junior person, and mentor them through this process. I truly wish you the well with them.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think some things want more than tea. You are doing it. And so much of this is going to give you short stuff that you look for.
Thank you very much, the presenters today and the participants. I just want to give some kind of call it an advice. The program we are going through right now is to build your capacity for draftsmanship. And I'll tell you that most of the lectures you've had the past few days are just providing you information that you can fully utilize or further utilize to improve your capacity for writing very, very successful proposals. Capacity in grantsmanship is very critical to your career development, especially in Nigeria and in African countries. Why do I say so? The federal government of Nigeria, I'm sorry the DJs here, has no priority for research. No priority for research. So if you are hoping or depending on getting funding through the federal government or through your university or through your institution, you will not make too much progress with regards to your career development. This is why it is very, very necessary that you develop that capacity to be able to access national and international grants that will help you build yourself. What are the critical elements of your career progression? You
You need to continuously improve on your professional qualification. Either you move for higher degrees or fellowship. Okay? And there are some grants that will help you improve, go for PhD, MSc, or postgraduate studies, or fellowship studies. And if you don't have the capacity to write good grants, you will not be able to access this. Secondly, you need to continuously improve your research experience. How do you improve your research experience? You can only improve your research experience when you are fully involved in research and learning through your mentors. Because at the end of the day, when you want to go for any improvement in your career, they're going to look at your CV, and you must continuously try to improve the scientific content of your CV, because that's what they're going to focus on. What is the experience of this person? And you can only do that by getting involved in research. Either you attract your own grant, or you get involved in a consortium that has a grant and build your capacity. And then, of course, the past speakers have mentioned this. You need to continually improve on your national and international networking. Professor Meremikwu just mentioned that when you leave this place, that it will be, in quote, a sin that you leave this place and you did, all the days you are here, they're not able to establish a colleague or some kind of relationship. I remember many, many years in Nima, when we go for conferences and workshops like that, you come back, you present to the scientific community in Nima. And one of the areas that they'll find out from you is, during the conference or during the workshop, how many new friends in terms of individuals, how many linkages in terms of institutions did you make? And if you start gradually for every, training or meeting that you are involved to make, to come up, forge new associations, either with individuals or with institutions, you find that your networking will start increasing. You'll be here in Nigeria, you have friends in the US, in Canada, in all the different competencies that when you want to develop a proposal, you can quickly identify some of these people that can help you improve a particular component of your proposal. And finally, all of these are through getting a grant or working in a consortium with a grant. Again, I don't know whether it has changed in Nigeria. It used to say publish. It hasn't changed. But let me say that I was discussing with somebody from the university recently, and he was saying that it has been modified. There is no more publish or perish. You publish sound publications. Not just you want to do because you want your name to be there, you just pick up anything. So for you to do some thorough research and have some sound publication, especially in impact, journals with high impact value, you must be able to work. And to be able to work in Nigeria, keep emphasizing, the money won't drop from federal government. The money won't come from your universities. If you were expecting to get funding or hoping to get funding from government through your university, what would you have done in the last 8 months? But if you sit and try to access networking and then improving your personal experience, in research to help you, progress, in your career development. So it is very, very critical. I'm saying this because I want all of you to take this program very seriously and let it not end here. Let it be a continuous thing. You can still on your own individually or as a group
improve your capacity. So I think I wanted to bring this because, capacity in draftsmanship is very, very critical.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think if I can summarize this session, it means capacity building is very important in governmentship. Again, building networks of people, researchers, people that will be useful to you in your research career. Lastly, you must be ready to go to any length to get that your dreams, desire, and get to the top of the research world. What's left for me is to thank Professor Juliet Iwelumor for this wonderful job, and all our faculty members for their contribution to this session. We are most, I'm sure they learned a lot. Now we go downstairs. First of all, we need to take good pictures. Some of our faculty members are leaving today, and we are not the DGs here. And after the lecture, we will go for a tea break. Then we should be back here by 1:30. Okay, let me say 1:40. Thank you all. Let's quickly go down.